Okay. Oh wait, and we should be on. Yes. Okay. Okay. I've turned the latency down a bit, so hopefully there won't be that really bad delay problem between you guys asking questions and me responding. I haven't quite turned it down to the lowest setting yet because I don't want to ruin the quality of the stream, but we can experiment with that next week. Um, so I've finally been able to start a little bit earlier today, so hopefully we won't have the problem of last time where I was a bit late starting just because. Oops. Oh, not meant to show that. Okay, cool. Sorry. Apologies for that. Okay, so it looks like everything is working pretty fine. I think I'll start today's video a little bit earlier today. I think I'll probably start at 8 and I'll try and be straight on the dot. But so by the way, guys, welcome to my stream tonight. Basically, this is continuing on from the stream last time where we basically did a live commentary over all my election videos, and today will be season 2, so this is obviously part 2 of 3. I did watch the stream last week, and I do want to apologise, this mic does seem to pick up practically everything. I might just turn down the volumes on both the microphone and the mic itself, with hopes that maybe it might not be as bad on the ear. I also realised you guys had to deal with my pretty terrible laugh. I'm going to try and make sure I don't do the snorty laugh because it sounds absolutely disgusting, and I do apologise for that. I was obviously getting a little carried away with myself, so I'm hoping if I at least try to be a bit more careful with how I'm speaking, I won't sound so horrible on the stream. So yeah, so about a few minutes from starting. If any guys have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. I'll try to answer them. I do apologise. Watching the live stream last time, I acknowledge I missed a few questions. Some of them were actually quite good, and I was really kind of wish I did answer them. And I apologise that I did miss them, unfortunately. An advantage to today is this. Oh, Mike Rand's back. So advantage to this season over the last one is these videos are a little bit more modern, so I do remember a little bit more about me making them. Fortunately, a lot of season 1 videos were so old that I barely remembered me making them. That unfortunately impacted my ability to live comment. So I will, hopefully should be able to comment a little bit better than this, and then hopefully season 3 will be the best because they'll be the most recent of my videos. But as we can see, we're currently right at the start of the 1940 election with my beautiful collage of all the thumbnails. You can see how dodgily I put the thumbnails together because you can literally see where I've actually failed to crop certain parts of the images and stuff. I literally just made this one originally in, like, I think it was Paint 3D, and I literally just started pasting the other people's faces on them. And the problem was they weren't actually the proper widescreen dimensions to fit a YouTube thumbnail, so they've been squished and squashed and around and stuff. Yeah, these thumbnails weren't very good, and there's no wonder that my early videos never did very well. I much prefer the later, especially the season 2 thumbnails were quite basic. I really liked the season 3 thumbnails. I think the season 3 thumbnails were really well done, and I really enjoyed them. So Harry's just said season 3 is going to take ages to watch in its entirety. It's not too bad. Like season 2 and 3 aren't necessarily that bad. Okay, I guess they get quite long at some of the end of season 3, but some of the early season 3 videos aren't too bad. And I've just realised the windows are open, so just give me a sec. I'm going to quickly close those. Apologies for that. That hopefully should make it a little bit quieter in here. We are about a only about 2 minutes from starting, and we'll get started with the election of 1940. I actually quite enjoyed the World War II election videos. They're probably some of the best ones. I definitely really appreciate starting season 2 because, in my opinion, the biggest jump in quality was season 1 to season 2. Sure, season 3 added more videos and colours, but season 2 was when I felt like I actually started making more, quote, professional videos. Okay, so it is 8 PM. We've only got 5 concurrent viewers. It says 5 playbacks. I'm not familiar with stream analytics, but I believe 5 playbacks means there's 5 people watching my videos, but they're just a bit behind. And I presume we've got 3 people currently watching at the moment. Hopefully that number will get up like it did last time. I think I'll just wait. I'm got a clock here. I'm going to wait 1 more minute, and then when that minute's done, we'll start with this selection video. And I'll try and see if I can get through these a little bit faster than last time, since I actually know what I'm doing. Like, the last stream was a little bit of a mess because of some things. Everyone poll in the chat. Best member for Flinders. You can only choose Philip Lynch or Peter. Mike Rand, I think you're getting a little technical there. I don't know if people know what you're talking about, unfortunately. A bit too inside a joke. Alright, we're about 20 seconds from starting, and I hope you guys do enjoy this video, because I definitely thought 1943 is a bit more interesting, but I do think 1940 is a good video. So we'll be starting in 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So we're now a third of the way through every federal election in Australian history. We've come a long way since Edmund Barton's Protectionist Party defeated George Reed's Free Trade Party in the election of 1901. So basically, when it came to this video, I wanted this video to be viewable by people who hadn't watched season 1. So that's partly why I made this video. I designed this video to have basically this introductory section so that we could watch, so you could watch it without actually watching the later. Now we begin watching the previous ones, because to us, who wants to watch season 1 these days? Those videos are pretty garbage. Where we will see one of the closest elections in the country's history. Just grayscaled it out so you wouldn't figure out who it is, but it's pretty obvious which party's the coalition. By a single prime minister and party, and finally finish off with the most controversial election. I did thought it was pretty well that photo was a bit in shadow, so it was hard to see who that person was. All Australian elections, with the election of 1940. Da, da, da. Yeah, now we get the more full-on opening. I wasn't even in time though. Like, you notice the photos flip at not quite the right time, and the default screen wipes. As the 1930s came to a close, the world was becoming a very dark place. So I had a good microphone now, which is nice. Fascist dictators had come to power and began a path of conquest across the continent and beyond. I don't know if some of these are actually footage of World War II, or like people were telling me that they make propaganda films where they show people blowing stuff up, like to try and encourage people to get into the war. Because putting cameras in the middle of a war zone looks kind of risky. By 1938, Lyons had secretly began to plan out his retirement from federal politics, hoping to move back to his hometown. Would have been interesting to see what happened if Joseph Lyons had been able to resign, as opposed to the unfortunate fate that did meet him. Tragically, however, his plans would not come to fruition. On Wednesday, the 5th of April, 1939, just 4 days before Easter, you haven't watched the 1940 election video? From a college in Sydney. He'd be rushed by St. Vincent's Hospital in Darlinghurst, but would eventually fall into a coma and die on the 7th of April, Good Friday. One of Australia's most beloved Prime Ministers had just become the first to die while in office. While the nation grieved its loss of its leader, Lyons' United Australia Party was struggling with who should succeed him. There was no constitutional precedent on who should succeed a Prime Minister in the event of his death, and matters were made worse with the UAP's lack of a deputy leader. Eventually, I love these like blank out man faggots. Blank out man faces. Jeez, I don't know what I was about to say there. But I use them a lot every time I have to find a mystery man figure. Like, there's no photo of the person or anything. Prime Minister would be extremely short, as on the 18th of April, a leadership ballot was held to determine the new leader. Now these are funny, because you notice these photos. That's actually a modern photo of the Parliament, and they're just grayscaled to make it look like it's old. Bruce was considered. And he wasn't even. It's a few times. I'll see if I can point out. It happens a lot in this season of me grayscaling modern photos. 19 years. But alas, at the end of the day, there was one man who people saw as a rightful successor to Joseph Lyons. And that was former Victorian Deputy Premier Robert
Back when I didn't bother
Menzies.
to get the
Menzies was an exceptional
name
politician
card
who was very
fitting
well
within the
acquainted with the law
photo.
and the Constitution, and had moved into federal politics to replace former national.
What's hard about
John
Robert
Latham,
Menzies is
who
finding
had moved
photos
to
of
join the
him in
Supreme
his
Court of
first term in
Australia.
office. Like
His move
most
to
of the
leader
photos
United
of him in his
Australia
second
Party,
term in
however,
office.
did not go over well with
Which is always a
current
little
interim
annoying.
Prime Minister Al Page. Page openly accused Menzies of incompetence and cowardness, a move partly derived from Menzies' refusal to enlist during World War I. And upon Menzies assuming the role as Prime
I don't even
Minister
know how
on
I found some of
26th
these
of April,
photos.
Page would withdraw his party's support from the coalition. This move was temporary, however, as Page would soon be deposed as leader of the Country Party, and replaced with Archie Cameron, who looks like a 1930s punk star in this
Yeah, like
photo.
what sort of
Cameron
photo
would then
is
see the
that?
Country
Like he
Party
looks
reinstate
so
their support for the
punkish.
coalition. Menzies' leadership would immediately be put to the test when on September the 3rd, less than 5 months after assuming office, Britain and France would declare war on Nazi Germany in response to their full invasion of Poland. On the very same day, Menzies would declare Australia would join Britain and France in declaring war on Germany in the following speech.
Fellow Australians,
I believe this is the first time I put a Prime Minister's voice inside a video.
that in consequence of a persistence by Germany in her invasion of Poland, Great Britain has declared war upon her, and that as a result, Australia is also at war.
Menzies would then begin to rally Australians for war, but would
Yeah,
face
there's
problems
Billy Hughes all
due to
over the place.
Australia's bitter memories of the First World War. And his
I wonder if
own
Billy
loss of
Hughes is going to
military
pop up in the
service.
chat again
He
like he
also
did last
to deal with
time.
His previous support for the German appeasement
You wouldn't be
policies
like- you wouldn't
of
like that, would you,
British
Mike
Prime Minister
Rand?
Neville Chamberlain, which historians look back on as a terrible policy which allowed Germany to become a much more powerful threat to Western democracies. With the chaos of World War II unfolding, Menzies was in no mood to call an election, hoping to delay it, potentially until 1941. But another tragedy would hit the Federal Australian Parliament, when on the 13th of August, a Lockheed Hudson
what do you mean by
bomber
you're getting
carrying
delays,
three
Harry?
cabinet ministers, including the Minister of Army
There are going to still be a bit
crashed on the road to
delays
Canberra, killing everyone on board.
from the last
event not
time
only seriously
because
impacted
I've turned the
Menzies'
latency down a
government
little
and
bit, but it's still not
It also brought about
off.
the situation which
So
three
they're still
by-elections would be
they're still
required to happen
open
just
for a
before
bit of
major
delay.
election. Thus, Menzies would bring the election date up to the 21st of September, so that no by-elections would be required. Now, it's about time I talked about the opposition. After a somewhat weak turnout in the election of 1937, Labor had vastly improved their position in government. John Curtin was quickly becoming a popular leader in the Labor ranks. It began taking talking points from current US President Franklin D. Roosevelt and began a campaign promising a new
There's
deal
about a
for
16-second
Australians,
delay
in which
from what
mass
I've
social
seen.
reforms would be implemented for the benefit of the working and
Billy
middle
Hughes is a
classes.
copycat,
However,
he's still
things
my
were not going to be
shit.
a walk in
Oh,
the park
slick.
for Labor.
Sorry.
Despite reunifying
Yeah.
back into the party
I
in
haven't seen him yet though.
1936,
It's just been you two in the
Labor
chat. The
members
other
of the
viewers
New
have
South
been
Wales
kind of
Labor
quiet.
Party, led by Jack Lang, still had disputes with the main federal party.
There's the Lang gang back again.
The lead up to the 1940 election.
That was like I love how I
Anti-war
find such
positions
aggressive
posed by
photos of the two of them.
sympathisers in the Labour ranks. Despite being quite the radical, Lang was a
A part of me used to enjoy
communist
World War II
and would
games,
encourage
so all
several
these
members
photos of
the
like
New South Wales
tanks
Labour
and
Party to
anti-aircraft
break
guns and
away
planes
for
always
a
gets me a
second
little
time to
excited.
run as the non-communist Labour Party. So it was going to be
there's
another
the
election
cuts.
in which a split Labour Party would face the currently undefeated United
Oh
Australia
good, I'm glad
Party.
it worked out for you,
And
Harry.
the winner was, well, no one. Menzies' coalition had won 36 seats, with 49.7% of the two-party preferred, leaving them short of a majority. While Curtin and Labor had won the two-party preferred with 50.3%, they had only won 32 seats. The non-communist Labor Party had won 4 seats with just over 5% of the first preferences. And since they would most definitely side with Labor, the two sides of
I'm pretty sure that's just a photo of the
deadlocked
New
with
South Wales
36 seats each.
Labour Party, like in the
Eventually, it
state.
came
Because
down
I
to
couldn't
federal
ever find a
parliament's two
photo of it.
independent
Oh
candidates.
yes, the stick figure,
Decided
yeah.
one of the two parties to form government. Wilson had frequently voted with Labor.
My sister couldn't stop laughing when I made that
Coalition,
face.
possibly due to the current infighting in Labor.
Oh dear,
Perhaps
that's
he didn't want
pretty
to see a
bad.
switch in government in the middle of a war. Either way, Coles would join Wilson in pledging their support for the coalition, allowing it to govern for a 4th term. However, the delicate balance of power.
Oh,
proved to be
what a
very
surprise! The
problematic
photo's in
the near
colour and it's
future.
literally just what you
Come
expected,
back
right?
next
Grace
time for the election of 1943. By 1940.
Alright, so that's the first one done. How are we going? We got 6 concurrent viewers and 12 playbacks. I think we're starting to pick up some members. I think I'll just keep playing through these early ones until we start getting more comments in the chat. So let's keep going.
By 1943, the Second World War had reached its climax, with massive battles happening all over the planet. In the middle of this chaos, Prime Minister John Curtin was attempting to win re-election for a second term in office against the coalition led by Country Party leader Arthur Fadden. Wait, slow
What's
down.
going
What
on?
on earth is going on? Where's Robert Menzies? When did Labor become government? Why is a Country Party member leading the coalition? Okay, looks like I'll need to start this one from the beginning.
So we've got someone at work, so I'll be dropping in and out. Well, that's alright. I would believe it would be about 1.5 hours to get through all these. These videos are a little bit longer, so it will take some time.
Australian history. Let's begin our story from the last election in 1904. United Australia Party and Coalition...
Play a bit of Gershwin in band, that's why I chose this piece.
With the help of the two independent candidates Arthur Coles and Alexander Wilson. Knowing that his position in power was
There's the stick
extremely
figure again.
flimsy, Menzies would attempt to temporarily end the political divide and form a national government with the Labour
Because this is what the
Party.
UK did. The UK actually formed a national government with Labour. So that's, if people are curious, that's why Menzies got the idea.
If he joined forces with Menzies.
It was kind of interesting that we sort of, in Australia, kept our political system almost perfectly intact when most other places around the world were facing major overhauls to their political layout because of the war. Also, you know, France had its entire republic destroyed. Britain went into a single government. And I think some of the other countries, also most European countries had massive changes.
Over the deployment of the Empire's forces. Churchill, fearing a full invasion,
And you can hear a plane coming into landing over my house as I'm recording this part.
Menzies, on the other hand,
Yeah, the amount of, so my house is right underneath flight path, so unfortunately I have to frequently deal with planes landing in the middle of my recording sessions. Luckily, we're not under the flight path where I am at the moment. I'm at my office, so it should be okay. Yeah, I never quite understood what was going on in this part, how exactly Menzies would start a political career in the United Kingdom. I think it's got something to do with how the Commonwealth was set up. But it was quite weird explaining how Menzies got deposed. In a similar way, it was hard to explain how Rudd gets deposed later on. Internal politics can always be a bit of a mess.
In August, a motion for Menzies to return to London for more
Yep, I could not find a photo anymore to that. What do I do as a job? I'm a uni student at the moment, actually, doing a PhD in geology. Completely nothing to do with politics. This is very much a hobby. Oh, there's the mystery man again.
Immediate candidates in the United Australia Party, the coalition would end up electing current Country Party leader Arthur Fadden, despite the Country Party being the junior partner of the coalition.
It's such a weird thing that happened in the coalition. Like what on earth? How on earth did this even happen?
Parliament for the short-lived Country Progressive National Party. When the 1930s punk star Archie Cameron was deposed as leader, Fadden would find himself elected as leader after a vote to elect the new leader was tied between previous leader Earl Page and future leader
Yes,
John McEwen.
that is John McEwen, the same person who will be Deputy Prime Minister in 1970. You realise just how old the Country Party was when Whitlam defeats them eventually. It's like they were just full of politicians from World War II. It's like, geez Louise.
He would not move into the Prime Minister's lodge after his predecessor, Cameron, crudely remarked that he would, quote, scarcely have enough time to wear a tracker from the back door to the house before you would be out.
I don't know, I always... For some reason, just censoring the swear word just makes it funny.
Fadden's government would be defeated when the two independent candidates, Arthur Coles and Alexander Wilson, disgusted by the...
I was so tempted to, if I could, make Wilson's face into a sad face or like an angry face, but I didn't really have the time to edit the image. But it would have been pretty funny.
As he had reigned for 40 days and 40 nights. At this point, Gowrie would have called for a new election, but with the threat of Japan at Australia's doorstep, he could...
If I'm not mistaken, this was definitely one of the longer election videos, wasn't it? This one was 8 minutes, so it's not as long as some of the new ones.
Support them. After getting assurance from the two that they would support Labour until the next election, Labour assumed office and John Curtin would become the 14th Prime Minister on the 7th of October 1941. He would be the only Prime Minister from Western Australia.
Alright, I'll move the volume for the videos up a bit.
As per Labour tradition since 1914, Labour could not enter Parliament without a crisis happening.
Basically, the reason why I haven't bothered turning the volume up these too much is, at the end of the day, it's not so much about you guys watching the video, it's more about me commenting on them. Because obviously if you guys want to watch these videos, you can watch them on YouTube right now. The point of this live stream is meant to be sort of...
in the Bismarck Archipelago
it's meant to be more of me commenting on how I make these videos.
And it would then be used
That's
by the
why I haven't
Japanese
necessarily put the volume of these videos up too loud. But
if
if you guys want this, I can do this for you guys.
Even though the Australian
It's
mainland
your
was under attack,
basically
the
your
event
choice.
that
You
would
want to hear
cause
more
the
of the
most
video,
concern
if you want
for
to hear more of
Australia
my voice.
would occur on the 16th of February when British, Indian and Australian forces garrisoned at Singapore would capitulate to the Japanese after being overrun. In the worst defeat in the entire British Empire's history, with over 80,000 troops becoming prisoners of war. Realising that the British were not going to be able to protect Australia, Curtin would turn to the United States for help in a drastic realignment of foreign policy, which drew massive criticism from the British and some Australians.
However, it brought attention to how dire Australia's situation was, as Japan began to occupy the surrounding duchies Indies and moved ever closer
World
to
War
a full invasion of Australia.
Getting like,
To cement an alliance with the US,
guns and
Curtin
explosions.
gave control of the Australian forces to US General
I got really
Douglas
excited
MacArthur
making these videos.
to command the combined US-Australian forces in challenging the Japanese forces in the South Pacific. MacArthur had previously arrived in Australia after retreating from the Philippines upon its Japanese occupation.
I know a lot about
Would
MacArthur
immediately begin
because
to
he
formulate
famously
defensive
stopped in my
strategy to protect
near my
Australia.
mum's hometown.
His first major battle
up in
would
the,
come
up
in
in the
May,
north of
when
the
a
city,
Japanese
up in the
carrier
north,
fleet
and made a
entered the
famous
Coral
speech
Sea
there.
in an attempt to capture the
There's
city
a
of
place
Port
called
Moresby,
Tawawi,
which would give Japan
which was
complete
like
control of
basically
Papua New Guinea
never mind, I can't
and leave
show you.
Australia
It's a
defenceless.
bit north of
In
Adelaide.
response, MacArthur would deploy his own carrier fleet to engage in the first major carrier battle in history, in which, despite heavy losses, MacArthur would successfully
Yeah, I thought
repel
so.
the
So I'll
Japanese
turn the volume
forces.
down a little bit. Like,
Australia's fortunes
at the end of the day, you're not meant to be
were
hearing the
Japanese
video as much as
forces
it's meant to be just hearing my
decisive
comment on
victory,
them.
and by
Like, if I've got
finding
nothing to
that
say, you can
their
just watch the video. But like,
combined Allied forces had
I could
repelled
just put a
Japanese
live stream of these
forces
videos
out of
up. But
Sormon
what would be the
Island, Papua
point?
New Guinea,
You can just watch these on YouTube already.
By mid-
So yeah, that's the main reason why I wasn't really bothering to put the volume up too much on these videos.
Despite giving control of
We're an
Australia's forces to
all-time
American
high.
general,
That's
Curtin had successfully seen off the invasion of Australia. Meanwhile, at home, he began to implement large social welfare.
It's all right,
programs,
Harry.
which were proving to be very popular with the middle and working classes.
Some of them have a few. I think we've got a lot of people on playback, so hopefully they'll become
Curtin
concurrent
remained
viewers
leader
if they
of
can
the
catch
coalition,
up.
but he was seen as a rather ineffective leader compared with Curtin. And the winner was
Can people on playback comment? I
John
don't
Curtin,
know.
the Labour Party, with their largest
People on
win in
playback, when you
history,
come to
with
up
17
to
seats, the
hearing
Honourable
me,
49
tell me if you want me to
seats,
stop for a
every
bit if you want to just catch up. Like I can easily pause for 5 minutes
barely managed to hold
before we
the
start the next
South Australian seat
episode.
by
Just
1.7% of
just
the
leave that in
vote.
the comment section if
The
you want me
Labour
to
Party also received its higher ever two-party
have a little
third,
break so you guys can catch up.
58.2%. The UAP country coalition was completely destroyed by this election, losing 13 seats to hold a measly 23 seats, which consisted of.
Well, at least
14 United
Arthur
Australian
Fadden
members
ended the election with the majority being the having more country party seats than United Australia Party seats.
Showed that it did not work at all well in opposition, and shortly after this election, it began to collapse, with factions of the party forming their own parties or merging with others.
You hear
Fun
about
fact,
parties
this
like in
election was
France where
important as
parties
it saw
completely
Australia's first
collapsed
elected
overnight.
female minister in the form of
It's always impressive how stable Australian politics have been. Like, even though the UAP dissolved, it basically was just the Liberal Party was just the UAP party again.
For the first time since 1916, Labor had complete control of the government in both the upper and lower houses, and it would be up to Curtin to see the nation.
Labor has never seen results this strong federally. They've, obviously, Western Australia, they've just seen a good result on the state level, but wow. Okay, do want to mention a bit about this election. This was the first election after the 2019 election, so I was tempted to put a congratulations method to the winner of the election, but as you might know, I wasn't particularly happy with the results in that election, but Bob Hawke had also just passed away at the time, so I thought it would be nice to put a honorary at the start to his passing. And so basically, I'll probably do the same if one of the other Prime Ministers passes away, but I don't think any of the Prime Ministers are too close to passing away at the moment. I think Howard is the oldest, definitely the oldest, but I think Howard's going to be around for about another possibly 10 more years before he fortunately kicks the bucket. But yeah, so that's what I was saying. Interesting thing about this election. This was the first election to be made after the 2019 election. So if you're curious about my opinions, how those opinions on that election affected me here, you can start. I don't think it's too super visible in the videos, but I was definitely a little bit more depressed, unfortunately. But anyway, let's carry on with this video.
The election of 1946 would be the first election of the modern era. With the war over, Labor would attempt to win, for their first time, a second full term in office. In this election, the Labor Party would be running under new leadership, while a brand new opposition force would challenge them under the leadership of a familiar figure. In most cases, a mid-election leader change.
I used that portrait of Robert Menzies like way too long. Like I was using it from all the way from 1946 all the way to about 1950 before I finally switched over to the newer photo of him.
Time period this was.
Does the opening annoy you a bit that I'm a little out of sync between the music and the photo switches?
After the election of 1943, Prime Minister John Curtin and Labour as a whole...
Someone was commenting the other day whether or not John Curtin was a bit cross-eyed or something, and I thought, I wonder if he was, because especially in that photo there, he looks his eyes do not look very aligned up.
The military forces of Japan back towards their home islands, Curtin was able to focus more on social policies at home. Since taking office, Curtin had been implementing large social reforms. Big winners of these reforms were women and Indigenous Australians who gained more eligibility in receiving welfare benefits. Other winners included students who would be exempt from military service while they finished their
It's difficult trying to find photos of these ones.
who would receive pensions to help with support their families, and Commonwealth workers.
Bob Hawke was the most successful Labour leader, but was he your personal favourite? No, Bob Hawke was not my favourite. I generally find Bob Hawke a bit of a Prime Minister. Like, he kind of compromised a lot on ideals that I don't think were necessary. And I think it was necessarily the... It was never a very revolutionary Prime Minister, like in terms of introducing bold new ideas that we look back on with great. What's the term? I'm running a bit long words. He hasn't got anything we look back on like going, wow, that was a big policy. I'd probably argue people like. I'm coming around to Ben Chifley actually. I definitely acknowledged a lot of. Liked Ben Chifley. Definitely seems to be one of the more impressive prime ministers we ever had. So possibly Ben Chifley. I also like obviously Andrew Fisher. Not a Keating fan, but I'm definitely also coming around a bit to Rudd and Gillard, looking back on their prime ministerships. But yeah, I'd probably say Ben Chifley at the moment.
This move would fail, with 54% of Australians voting against the move, only getting the majority of support in South and Western Australia. This move would be seen by many as
interesting which state votes which way,
and would raise concerns about their ability to govern democratically. As the war drew to a close, Curtin would find himself frequently travelling to Britain and the United States for war talks with his peers Winston Churchill and Franklin D. Roosevelt. These regular trips would end up taking a large toll on Curtin's health, and he would suffer a heart attack in November 1944. And would be absent from the Parliament until January the next year.
Yeah, I probably should mention he also smoked a lot. Him and Chiefly both smoked a lot, and it wouldn't be surprised if both of them would eventually die from complications caused by that.
After fellow US President Roosevelt also passed away. Thus, Curtin would become the second Australian Prime Minister to die while in office.
I think I was watching a video by the YouTuber JJ McCullen on the Canadian Prime Minister during World War II, and I think he pointed out that outside of that guy and like Joseph Stalin, every single other world leader that went into World War II came out different. So obviously Menzies went into World War II, and Curtin and Chifley came out. Roosevelt went into World War II and Truman came out. Chamberlain went into World War II and Churchill came out. And so in nearly every case, a new prime minister would emerge out of the war. Then that went in, except the Canadian Prime Minister. That was the one person that went into the war and then left the war, and he was still in charge of Canada. I think I mentioned before that I've actually got a friend at my club who literally called James Fenton. I pointed that out and he thought it was hilarious. Probably should have mentioned stop talking a bit because we've got Frank Ford on the screen. Does anyone actually have any opinions on Frank Ford? Like being... Oh yeah, that's right, I made a mistake there. I got him... I named him the wrong person. Here we go, we've got to see him with Everett and Stanley Bruce. That looks like a video, but well, that is such a badly resolution image.
Decisively lose to Treasurer and longtime colleague of Curtin, Joseph Benedict Chifley, or Ben Chifley.
So you'd say Bob Hawke's success was due to him playing it safe? Yeah, I'd say Bob Hawke was like Labour does very. I've always said Labour does very well when their leader is just a really nice, friendly bloke, and Bob Hawke was most definitely that. Like, we don't really want our prime ministers to be expert politicians. We want our prime ministers just to be friendly, nice blokes. Like, I'm going to put your effective, smart politician as the treasurer, because it seems like people much rather have the guy at the front be a nice, friendly guy, not a hard-working, unlikable guy, which annoys me a little bit, because arguably you want your best foot forward, not just your, not just the nicest looking one.
On the 15th of August, just over a month since Curtin had passed away, the Japanese Empire surrendered to the Allied forces after 2 atomic bombs were dropped on major cities in the home islands, and a new Soviet offensive wiped out their holdings in the Asian mainland. Thus, World War II would come to an end. With
And
the
I get to
finally
stop. I
over,
can't use any
Chile
more
would face
aggressive
two
photos of
tasks.
war photos.
One was reconstructing a nation depleted by war, and the second was attempting to win a historic second full term in office, something no Labour government had ever achieved before in history. However, his road to victory...
It's crazy to think there's never been a re-elected Labour government in up until this point.
Chively had only led Australia through the last months of the war, and lacked a lot of the charm his predecessor had. He was also facing a new threat on the other side of Parliament, led by a familiar figure. After being ousted as leader of the coalition, Robert Menzies had almost left politics for good. He was encouraged to stay on by several of his supporters in Canberra. While on
What
the
would have happened if
backbench of
Robert Menzies
Parliament,
left?
began a series of weekly radio broadcasts to whom he called the Forgotten People.
The Liberals are pretty good at that, aren't they? Like having a...
These were people who were not part of the...
The Liberals are pretty good at having their leader completely fail and sort of come back and become like super successful. Like both Howard and Menzies did that. You never think a Labour Prime Minister could do that. I don't really see Bill Shorten ever coming back and becoming a super successful Prime Minister. I just don't see that happening. Now, mind you, Howard did it not too long ago.
The United Australia Party of the now 81-year-old Billy Hughes, who took over leading the party in the absence of a proper leader. I still have trouble remembering this guy was elected back in 1901. Now with control of the party,
Yeah, it's
Menzies declared
basically almost at the 50s and this guy's still in office.
Purpose. At this point, most of its members had left to join other parties. In 1944,
Surely Billy Hughes couldn't have been that effective in a politician at this time.
Wales, with members of multiple non-Labour
Low
parties,
JPEGs.
they proposed that they unify together to form
Menzies is quite a big fellow, isn't he? He's like a decent few centimetres taller than everyone in the photos.
This was to be called the Liberal Party of Australia, and
yes, this is the Liberal Party of today.
And thus, the election was set for the 28th of September 1946, and it would be the first election with the familiar party layout we all know to this day, with Labour representing the left side of politics and the Liberal Party and the Country Party, who they had recently reformed a coalition with, representing the right side of the politics. And the winner was Ben Chifley and Labour with a
Didn't even break there.
loss of 6 and 54.1% of the two-party preferred. Thus, for the first time in Australian history, Labour had won 2 elections in a row. Menzies and his newly found party were successful in picking up 6 seats, including a surprise win in 4th seat of Capricornia.
I can't remember why that happened. There was some policy issue in Capricornia that led everyone to vote against Frank Ford.
After World War II, thus the coalition would remain in opposition for another 3 years. This election also saw 2 independents get elected in the form of Doris Blackburn and our old friend Jack Lang, who made his first foray into federal politics.
Lang made a
still under the
brief
Labour
appearance in
brand.
federal politics.
After this election, questions began to be raised if Menzies' Liberal Party were
Fortunately, he didn't win the next
to
election.
Labour, and rumours began to
Very
speak
curious what happened to him.
soon be replaced as its leader for a more popular figure. Meanwhile, Labour, still with their majority in both houses, would soon find their reconstruction efforts in a lot of trouble. Come back next time for the election.
Seeing as we're not getting much chat, so I'm just going to let the next one run straight into it.
By 1949, World War II was...
Oh yeah, that's right, my mic broke at the end of the last video.
From the ashes of this conflict, the Soviet Union had emerged as a global superpower.
So unfortunately my good mic broke in the last one, so I had to go to a cheaper mic in this one. But this new mic didn't sound too bad actually.
This war would lay the backdrop for the election of 1949, in which Labour, under Ben Chifley, would push their luck for a historic third...
There's a few times I mentioned his name, it's like Ben Chifley.
Under former Prime Minister Robert Menzies.
You see, I wasn't the most thorough when I came to labelling the Prime Minister. You can see like the boxes haven't been properly dragged together. I probably could have done a better job thinking, oh, John Mezzo's here. I wonder who'll win the next 7 elections. Oh, yes, Mezzo. I think we definitely know who's going to win the next 7 elections.
Would attempt to push ahead with his post-war policies of reconstructing and building the future.
Thomas is here. Welcome. Glad to see you two are finally caught up. Oh, it says we only have 2 concurrent viewers at the moment. What's going wrong? Did you study history/politics uni? Ironically, no. I did not study is that Mitchell? Sorry, Mitchell. I didn't actually study any politics at uni, which kind of part of me wonders whether or not I should have. But I was too deep in science in high school and uni that I felt like I can't really have time to do politics.
Still a problem today. Along with the massive infrastructure projects, other legislation achievements would be made, including the introduction of a separate Australian citizenship, as well as the nationalisation of Qantas, today Australia's biggest airline.
So we're talking about citizenship because I haven't seen the 2019 election yet. But no, so basically uni I only ever did geophysics and stuff. What was with the Victorian Labour Party splitting away
One of the
Anyway,
biggest legacies of
is
the
that Jack
Sheffield
Lang right?
government was changes
Oh wait, are you
services,
talking about the DLP
also
or
known
the
as
Lang
existence
Labour? Because Lang
federation.
Labour's
The
New
changes
South
made
Wales.
by
If
Labour
you're talking
in
about
Australia
Victoria, that's
sought to
coming up
improve
soon.
these services by expanding
What made you make this
the
video?
government law,
So,
regulation,
Mitchell, if you watched
as well as removing
my
several
last
regulations
live stream, I
that
explained that my
prevented
interest was with a YouTube channel called Mr. Beat.
although Indigenous Australians
Mr.
were
Beat
left out of this
basically
space.
did a video on all the presidential elections in American history, and so I decided to do all the parliamentary elections in Australian history. I liked it because of the whole continuous nature of it, how you can basically tell a continuous story with basically no random jumps, because most other times when people talk about politics, they talk about politics of a specific era or a specific time. They don't talk about the continuous story from start to finish with no breaks.
Leading to fears that Australia too would soon be taken over by communists. Back at home,
Does that photo have Clement Attlee from the UK?
Oh,
I'm sorry, which photo? I don't know what photo you're talking about. Sorry.
Extreme costs of reconstruction. To account for this, Shifley would attempt to force all government entities to bank with the state-owned Commonwealth Bank.
So the UN photo?
The government's money pool. When this was deemed unconstitutional,
Wouldn't surprise me if he was in the UN
Shifley
photo.
would take the extreme move of proposing the nationalisation of all banks in Australia. Nationalisation of the banks had always been a desire of the left faction of the Labor Party. However, it had been opposed by all Labor Prime Ministers up until this point. The proposal to go forward with this motion caused a massive backlash, not just from Conservatives, but also from several members of the Labor Party. This move was seen as the first step towards a communist future, since all of Australia's finances would now be under de facto government control.
Yeah, so Harry, if you're talking about the Victorian Labor Party breaking away, we covered that in the 1955 election video.
This move by Labor
Group of three photo, I think. Oh, yeah, I think that is. Yeah, I think that is Attlee. Yeah, I know what photo you're talking about. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that is Attlee.
And would successfully lead the campaign against bank.
John, I found your videos on only earlier this year, and I was stoked to see you had covered every election. Keep up the good work. Well, thank you, John. I say this is we've been going for over 2 years now. If you've seen the anniversary videos,
strike over working conditions in coal mines.
it's pretty impressive. I get pushed into season 2, and I haven't actually gone over a year yet. We'll see the first one.
To attack Labor and promote
Yeah, Attlee. Yeah, I always found Attlee quite interesting figure. It's a shame he got knocked out pretty quickly. I would have been interested if he'd been able to remain Prime Minister through the rest of the 50s.
This would be the first time since Federation the military was used to break up a strike.
Especially since there's not a lot of background info on the wikis for these elections. It's kind of ironic because a lot of the videos... Actually, no, you're right. The elections themselves don't have much information. To find the information about what led into the election, you have to look at the Prime Minister and opposition leaders' Wikipedia pages individually. Also, look at some of the events going on.
For the first time in Australian history, with an additional
Was it the fear of communism what kept Menzies largely going? Sort of, but it was also the DLP. But we're getting there, Harry. So don't quite jump to it. We'll talk more about that later. It's funny with that one. I said the population almost doubled since World War II, but it's actually over doubled since World War II. I kind of had to make a blank guess because I couldn't find the information of what the population was till after I made that comment. That's why I said almost doubled when I should have said well over doubled.
This was the first election since Federation in which all the major parties gained seats. The reason for Labor's defeat at this election went far beyond just...
Yeah, that's Attlee. I'm pretty sure that's Attlee.
Labor's continued use of water
Wouldn't surprise me if it was.
also highly unpopular. And they continue insurgencies by communist sympathisers around and within the party.
There's one photo of a Communist Party rally. Like, that was it. It's not that many photos.
No longer fit to run a country, and thus the longest-serving Labor government until this point in history.
Longest-serving Labor government lasted literally 7 years.
It had been over 8 years since he had last sat as Prime Minister, the longest hiatus for a multi-sitting Prime Minister in Australian history. However, things were not looking good for Menzies. Labor still had the Senate majority, and Shifley would...
Menzies also benefited from the distribution. Yeah, I've never understood why the coalition seems to just naturally have a better knack. Do you think Labor would have a better knack? Do you think the coalition would eat up all their country votes, so the country seems to be all won by huge margins? Oh, yeah, my...
1951.
You think that the country party would eat all its votes, and so it's just be a battle in the cities, but that's not the case. It is the case in Adelaide, but not nationwide.
Against the Labour Party.
Yeah, and I've mentioned that John Mezzo lost the two-party about 3 times and still got into office. Yeah, we think US is bad. At least it's not by as ridiculous margins. Like, I'm pretty sure Hillary Clinton won like 52% of the vote or something ridiculous.
Since 1949, the Cold War between the East and the West had only heated up. UK Labour and Australian Labour have a lot in common, being out of power for ages. Yeah, that is somewhat true.
Both they and the United States had begun to build up huge stockpiles of nuclear weapons.
I'd like to think that our Labour Party's in a little bit of a better position at the moment, compared with the UK Labour Party at the moment, which is in quite a poor shape, unfortunately. But on the bright side, we have the advantage of state governments, which means Labour can get a lot of electoral success on a local level, which some of the US suffers with. Joe Biden barely won with 7+ million votes. That sounds a bit like an oxymoron. That's 7 million votes is a lot of votes.
During the Menzies government, the first cracks in the White Australia policy began to form. The first of these, quote, cracks was the opening of Australia's borders to a handful of non-European war refugees.
To me, the guy on the bench looks a bit like Tom Cruise.
The Colombo Plan, which allowed students from Asian countries to study in Australia.
Finding photos of non-white Australians before like the 1970s is really difficult.
Of the racial conflicts seen in other countries.
Do you believe that the so-called white Australia policy...
I was always a bit nervous putting this video into the clip because I just know a lot of people with modern people with certain political views would get very inspired by this video. So I hope I put it in enough context as not to inspire certain views.
Having a homogeneous population. I don't want to see reproduced in Australia the kind of problem they have in South Africa, or in America, or increasingly in Great Britain. I think it's been a very good policy, and it's been of great value to us.
Menzies would suffer a case of deja vu when his short prime ministership would yet again be called into another war, this time over the Korean Peninsula. On the 25th of June 1950, the communist-backed forces...
I saw a poll the other day. UK looks like a lot of young people have completely abandoned the Labour Party and gone entirely to the Greens. Yeah, like, fortunately the UK Labour has unfortunately run into an identity crisis following Corbyn, and it's not been good for their party. Basically, like, at least here in Australia, the Labour Party still has a strong appeal to young Australians, whereas in the UK, they have no idea what they're a worker party or a liberal or a progressive party. They're kind of a nothing party at the moment, and that's not good. You do not want to be a nothing party.
Had pushed the Allied forces back to the 38th parallel, and by 1951, the war had turned into a stalemate with neither side advancing. Unable to stamp out
Cornwall and Everett were both in favour of it too.
Back at home. For the past 2 years, Menzies had struggled to pass legislation due to the Labour majority in the Senate, and thus desired a double dissolution election. A double dissolution election, if you remember, is an election where the entire Senate is...
Yeah, I had to remind you guys how a double dissolution election works because
not been called since 1914.
Because there hadn't been one since 1914. There's quite a few that haven't in the next few years.
A bill that would ban the Australian Communist Party from running in any future elections.
Does Australian Labour appeal to young people? Greens did much better in 2019. Okay, the Greens won 10% of the vote in 2019. Labour won like 33%. And if you look at the younger vote, like Labour wins like 30%. I'm pretty sure Labour outperforms the Greens on the youngest age bracket. A lot of people I know are strong Labour supporters. Like I'm part of Young Labour, and we have a lot of people. So there are a few reasons why people vote Labour over Greens in my age group. Some of them just say the Greens just don't have any political experience. They think Labour's a more mature party. Labour's more economically focused. Greens is more socially focused. They think the Greens are hostile and scare people off. So there's a lot of reasons why young people like myself vote Labour over the Greens. So I wouldn't say that the Greens are necessarily destroying the Labour on the polling in the young age groups. Labour UK did well with mayoral races, but have been an identity crisis since going from Corbyn to Starmer. Real hard for them to make a coalition of voters in the UK in particular. Yeah, well, it looked like Welsh Labour did pretty well in getting re-elected in the local government, and obviously Sadiq Khan got re-elected, although it was pretty close. But yeah, so it's worried that even had Labour not been in power in either of those places, they probably would not. They would have gone backwards. They've gone backwards in Scotland, I think, as well.
Come back next time for the election of 1954.
Okay. Oh no. Oh, this one. Oh, this is a good one.
A Soviet defector and a secret spy ring inside a major nation's government.
You might call it a plot to a James Bond story. I call it the election of 1950.
Yeah, so Scotland used to be a Labour stronghold. It was a Labour stronghold, I think, from about the 60s until about 2010, when the SNP sort of rose to power. I think it's just because there's an issue in Scotland that you're either a Conservative who wants to stay as part of the UK or a Liberal who wants to leave. And so Labour can't appeal to either of them, really.
Almost identical to those before the war. Meanwhile, back at home, Menzies' prospect of winning a third term in office was in doubt.
Although it was UK Labour that gave Scotland their independent government in the 90s.
If Menzies hoped to win, he would need to use every trick in the book.
This guy is so unheard sometimes.
Communism in Australia. After his original
Yeah, it's funny that thanks to preferential voting, Labour and the Greens tend to cover each other votes, because ironically preferential voting was created to allow the Liberal and Country Party to run against each other. So it's kind of ironic that it's now the left-wing parties benefiting from the system as opposed to the right-wing parties.
In effect, would be removing a political party from running against him. Leading the campaign against the referendum would be the new leader of the Labour Party.
It's been funny, I had trouble finding photos in these times.
Known as H.V. Evatt, or Doc Evatt. Evatt was a man with one extensive record. After serving in the New South Wales state government in the 1920s, he became the youngest appointed judge to the High Court at 35, where he remained until 1940, where opposite to former Prime Minister Edmund Barton, he left the High Court to join federal politics, and ironically won the seat of Barton, named in honour of our first Prime Minister. In federal politics,
that's really that
Evatt
ironic.
played an instrumental role in Curtin's wartime government, and played a huge role in the establishment of the United Nations. In 1948, he achieved the prestigious position of President of the United Nations General Assembly, a position often joked as being President of the world. As President, Evatt would play a prominent role in the establishment of the State of Israel, a motion he would call a great victory for the UN. Wonder how that worked out today.
Yeah, I was tempted to put a video there of an Israeli rocket hitting a Palestinian building, but my brother thought it was a little too on the nose, so I decided to remove that clip. The series True Believers covers the events of Australian politics from 1945 to 1950. It's really well if you haven't seen it. Yeah, I watched episode 1 of True Believers. Unfortunately, the episodes are really long. Unfortunately, and so it got a little bit boring to watch. But it was, if I have the time, I would love to try and watch the whole of it, because I think it's very informative.
However, most of Evatt's critics would not openly criticise his decision.
I must confess, I learnt my initial Australian politics from an 80s puppet show of Robbie Frigger on YouTube. Yeah, my mum was telling me about that. She told me that she used to watch that when she was younger. I've seen a few of them, like some of the election coverages where the rubbery figures would do interviews. It shows there Evatt would argue cases like the anti-communist proposal in the High Court himself, while in the Shadow Cabinet and the opposition. Yeah, so definitely got the idea that Evatt was very involved with the courts despite being a politician.
Petrov decided to defect from the USSR and request political asylum in Australia. In return for his defection, Petrov would provide evidence of a large Soviet espionage operation occurring in Australia. Menzies would accept Petrov's offer, and with the help of ASIO, he would defect on the 3rd of April 1954. After a few complications, including Petrov's wife almost being taken back to the USSR, Petrov would hand over documents revealing an extensive
there's apparently a famous video of Petrov's wife being carried up to the plane and the crowds attacking the Soviets and ripping her away.
It caused Evatt to take a major role in the following Royal Commission. Using his experience as a High Court judge, he took the role of attorney for his fellow accused staff members. Evatt delivered very harsh cross-examinations of the ASIO members involved in
Yes, this is Evatt being involved in the court case. Coalition in Garfield Barwick there, while he was still
over that of his clients.
He was still
Evatt, however, saw his silence
before going to politics. Yeah, that's a bit underhanded.
And with the Royal Commission into the spy ring still going on, the election would be set for the 29th of May, 1954. This election would also be the first election since 1929 in which no Senate elections took place. This was due to the
so I actually forgot to mention there was a Senate election in 1952, I believe, and I completely missed that. I do apologise. I should have mentioned that. It's very bad on me that I forgot to mention about the Senate election that happened then.
This was the second time, the first being the 1940 election, that the party that lost the two-party preferred vote...
In a little bit of my defence, or not really, technically this series isn't about the Senate, it's about the lower house, and the Senate is merely just gets talked about and how it affects the lower house. So obviously that's why I haven't really covered too much. That's why I don't cover all the Senate results.
To benefit the Liberal Party's chances in an election they had been predicted to lose. Despite the loss, Evatt would soon have a second chance to
Fun
win
fact,
government,
the
but due to
UN
calendar issues
Youth
between the House and
Mock
Senate,
Convention
a new
event
election
is still
was
called
required
the
the very
Evatt Cup
next year
after
to bring the two houses back in
the
sync.
NPM. I don't think
Come
it's
back
after the
next
NPM,
time,
it's after the
election,
fact that he's one of the founders of the
1955.
UN.
By 1953, it was almost certain that a Labour victory was inevitable. The economy continued to stagnate, and people began to become weary of the 6-year-old Liberal Country Coalition government under Robert Menzies. So what could go wrong for Labour? Well, pretty much
Everything.
As talked about in the previous election, the Senate and the House calendars had fallen out of sync, and thus an immediate election was required to follow up the 1954 election.
I'm a big fan of
the coalition would yet again be fighting against
50s
the
music. I always thought the 50s had a good taste in music. I'm not sure what other people think about music in the 50s. That's why I really like the backing tracks I used in
the
these
investigations into
videos.
the Australian-based Soviet spying had come to a close. While some communist sympathisers, mostly within the Australian Communist Party, had been partaking in minor acts of espionage for the Soviet Union, no major spying was discovered.
Jeez Louise, guys, we
Nobody
haven't
was
got to
ever
those parts of the
charged.
video yet.
Despite the Royal Commission being a failure, the repercussions of the investigation would have dramatic effects in Parliament. After the 1954 election, H.V. Evatt remained the leader of the Labour Party and was furious at his party's performance in the previous election. He continued to push the narrative that Menzies had conspired with ASIO to use the Petrov affair to sway public opinion away from the Labour Party. Hoping to put any rumours of Soviet spying to rest, Evatt would directly contact Soviet Foreign Minister
Vyacheslav, yes,
I'm
I
not
can
going to
pronounce it.
that Molotov to inquire if there was any secret spying. Upon getting a
And this
denial
big
of
image they have of
spying,
Scott
Evatt
Morrison's
presented
puppet
Molotov's
in
statement to
holiday
Parliament,
clothes,
where he got the following
being away from the
reply.
bushfires, I think. Okay. So if people didn't understand what happened here, Evatt literally got a Soviet politician to tell him there wasn't a spy ring. That's why
This
they were
major
laughing.
political
So he
graph
literally
left
believed a
Evatt even more
Soviet
infuriated, and he
officer
began to
that there
lash
was
out
no
at
spy
members
ring.
of his
Like,
own party.
seriously?
He took
Of course he's
particular
got to say
aim
there's
at
no
the
spy ring.
so-called Groupers, a religious anti-communist
And that's
movement.
groupers,
In
not
late May,
not the
Labour
other
Party had
word.
set up the industrial groups, a series of organisations designed to stop.
How do you think Australian Labour
infiltrations of
will
unions
react to
by
Green's new
communists?
message
By
emphasising the
1955, these industrial groups had become infested by the social studies
Sandesqua
movement, a
tax
right-wing
the
contingent
rich
of strong
idea?
anti-communists
I'll
led
say
by
this
devout
tax the rich
Catholic
idea.
Bartholomew
I think Labour
Alphonse
supports the
Santamaria.
idea.
These members of the industrial groups became known as
I
groupers
just don't think
and
it's
would
necessarily
oppose
they're
not
big on
only
talking about at the
communism,
moment, partly
but
because they're
any
trying
element of the
to
Labour Party not deemed
appeal
anti-communist
to
enough. Evatt accused
rich
groupers of trying to
or
undermine
rich
using
powerful
their strong
Australians so
influence
that they
within the Labour
don't
Party,
money roll the
particularly in
Labour Party to
Victorian
another
parts of
election
the
defeat like they did
Currently
last
led
time.
by three-time
So Labour's probably
Premier
just being a
John
bit
Cain.
quiet.
Evatt, with the help of his supporters in Kane's government, would attempt to wrestle Santamaria's influence away from
So
the
like
state
I think they
parliament.
support the motion,
In
but they're not
early
going to necessarily bring it
1955,
up
the
because
federal Labour
if
executive
Labour's
dissolved
seen
the
as
Victorian
anti
state executive
really
and
anti
appointed
super
a
rich
new state
people, I think it's going to
executive
hurt
in
them
place.
in
This move only had the effect
in the
of
election
creating
just
two-state
because of the
executives.
influence
For
rich
those in
people have
Parliament
over
who were
politics.
pro-Santa
Unfortunately,
Maria,
sad, but
acknowledging the old executive
it's
as
a reality.
legitimate, and the pro-Evatt supporters acknowledging the new state executive instead. This split would eventually lead to the total expulsion of all 24 pro-Santa Maria members from the Victorian State Labour government. These expelled members would then join forces with the state Liberal opposition under Henry Bolt to push a no-confidence movement in Kane's government.
So I probably shouldn't be
where it
talking
would
because this is
be
the part
crushed
that I
in the
think Harry
1955
was
state
interested in
election.
about understanding
Labour
about
would remain in opposition
why
until
Victoria
1992,
Labour
and Labour would finally win under
split.
Kane's son, John Kane Jr. Getting back
I
to
always feel
federal
like it's such a
politics,
Lion King-like
implications of the
story.
Victorian state Labour
Like
government
the
split
son
would
comes
see
back and takes
expelled
off,
members form their own federal
claims the
party,
throne.
called the Labour Party Anti-Communist, not to be confused with the non-communist Labour Party from the 1940s. This new party would also gain the support of some
I'm curious,
Victorian-based
when
unions
about
who were
did
supportive
Rupert
of the
Murdoch's influence in the
groupers
media in
movement.
Australia?
One figure who strangely did not join the new party was
Quite a long time ago. Like,
himself.
obviously, he
He
took
chose
on
to
the
remain
advertiser
affiliated
which
with
his
any
father had
political
created.
party.
His father
He would,
arguably was
however,
influencing
hold a large
politics, and he
amount of
basically just
influence over the
inherited
new anti-communist
the
party.
influence
Back in
politics from his
Canberra,
dad
Menzies
just
was
to
quick
another
to
level.
capitalise on the
There's an
fractured Labour Party
oxymoron.
and was all too happy to
Smiley,
call
can
an
you please
election
write down
for
what the
10th
oxymoron
December
was? I missed
1955.
it.
His confidence came from the anti-communists encouraging
What's your
their
opinion
voters
on the
to practice
base
the coalition
income
ahead
model
of the Labour
alternate
Party.
to welfare?
Santa Maria had made it very
Heard
clear
of
that
it?
he intended to keep Labour from winning government until
No,
they
I
had
haven't,
abandoned all
sorry.
support for any communist ideals.
Is this something that came out
This
just
election
today?
would also see an additional seat added to Parliament, bringing the total up to 122.
They don't mention seat counts much these days.
And the winner was Robert Menzies.
Technically, there's a new
Coalition
seat gets added in
64 seats, a gain
in
of
the
11,
2019
could also
election,
be
but I haven't
seen
really
as a
mentioned it.
4.9% gain the two-party preferred. Thus, Robert Menzies became the first Prime Minister in Australian history to win 4 elections in a row, a record only 2 other Prime Ministers hold. Evatt and the Labor Party had lost 10 seats to now hold 47, washing away all their gains since 1949. While the anti-communists had not picked up any seats in the lower house, they had gained 2 seats in the Senate and won 6.1% of the first preferences, ensuring they would hold the balance of power for the foreseeable future. Fun fact, despite the heavy amount of anti-communist rhetoric dominating this election, the Australian Communist Party would reach its peak support in this election at 3.64% of the first preference votes.
This meant Labor not being able to appear
this would not be
anti-rich.
enough to get a senator elected,
Labor not
and the federal party
being
would
able to
begin
be
to decline
anti-rich.
in popularity
I thought that's
until the
piercing
federal
part of Labor,
dissolution
haha.
in 1991.
Yeah, you know that
This
Labor
election
today,
had been a
Labor's
disaster for
pro-worker, but like
Catholics had
they want to
always
appear
been one of the
pro-worker,
most reliable
pro-working
voting
people.
blocs.
But that
With
doesn't mean they want to
large
necessarily
numbers
appear
voting
as
for the
anti-rich
Labour
people.
Party, anti-communist, the party's
Like,
voting base was decimated.
Helping someone
Evatt
drowning in a
himself
river
almost
doesn't
lost
mean
his seat
pushing
last
someone
year,
else
when
into
over
the river.
three-quarters of
You know what I
independent
mean?
voters' preferences went to his Liberal opponent.
It's super interesting what's happening
Unfortunately,
in
things for
both the
Labour
U,
were
in
only going
both
to get worse,
in
as other
both
state
and
Labour
you. I think
branches
you've been
began
both
to
here
fracture,
and the USA.
with members flocking
Yeah,
to join the new party. Comeback
Yeah, like I
next
do,
time,
I do
election
find
of
Biden's win
1958.
in the US definitely
By
changed
1958,
changed the
economy
political
was in poor
landscape here.
shape.
I think
A major global
our government's looking a
downturn in
lot
international markets
worse
combined
now
with
that
several
Trump's
years
gone.
of
We
stagnation
can't just say, oh
left
look, we're not
Australia in
Trump.
bad
Well, we're
shape.
better.
In a
And I
normal
don't,
election climate,
that's
this
currently
would spell doom for
they
any
can't use that
government.
anymore at
But
the
the
moment.
late 50s was not a normal time period. A new party had emerged across the country, and it would make its mission to stop the Labour Party
The
ever
richer,
forming
the richer
government.
educated gravitated Labour Democrat. Yes, that is true. And I am concerned about parties like the Labour Party becoming a so-called progressive capitalist party. But I don't think Labour's super suffering from that. Unfortunately, other left-wing parties around the world are suffering from it, and it's kind of rubbing off onto Labour, which annoys me a bit.
Throughout this time, Menzies had
Like
grown
King
into
said,
an
capital and Labour work
exceptional
together.
politician
Yeah,
and
like
began to look
that's what the
towards
Accords are sort of
international
about, which we'll
scene.
cover in a later episode.
Melbourne, Australia would play host to the Olympic Games. This was the first time the Olympics
It's called guaranteed
were held
minimal
outside of
income.
Europe and North
Interesting, is it?
America.
So is it different to the
Despite a few
minimum wage?
complications, the event would bring much prestige to the country. Despite engaging
Yeah,
with
there you
nations
go,
in
the
the
Olympics.
local region,
It's pretty nice
Menzies
footage of the
remained a
Olympics
strong
actually.
supporter of
So I
Australia's
think it's all
traditional ties
it's
to
all
the United
filmed and
Kingdom.
restored.
Menzies was an adamant supporter of the British monarch, and he would attend the coronation of Queen Elizabeth
Haven't mentioned
II,
Menzies
who has
is
been
a
reigning monarch of the
massive
15th
supporter
and
of
founding
the
our current 30
monarch.
ministers.
He apparently
Support
was
towards
apparently
the UK
freaked
would
Queen
lead him to
Elizabeth
join
out
forces
by
with
how
the French in
much she was
challenging
sucking up to
Egyptian
her.
President Gamal Nasser's nationalisation of the Suez Canal in an event that would become to be known as the Suez
Elizabeth
Crisis.
Humphrey's book
Besides
on the
presiding over a
Accords.
long period of
No, I haven't.
political
Sorry, I'm not
stability,
actually much of a
Menzies
reader,
was not
unfortunately.
presiding over a strong
So especially when it comes to like lots of
economy.
books, I know a lot of people like.
I
I feel horrible because everyone else is like, yeah, I've just finished reading this book by insert famous person, and this book by the insert famous person. And I'm here like going, I watched a few YouTube videos. Let's face it, like those guys reading books haven't had enough time to watch these sort of videos. That's why I can make these videos and they don't.
But across the country, the party was in crisis. After breaking away from the Victorian branch of the Labor Party, the anti-communist forces of B.A. Santa Maria began to gain supporters in other states.
Actually, I did read one book. I haven't mentioned it yet, but I read a book called The First 100 Years, and it basically covered all the elections, and it's how I actually sourced a lot of season 2. I was going to show it to you guys, but I never got around to it. But if you remind me, I might try and see if I can find it. But it's a book that covers what happened to the election and why the results sort of turned out the way they did. And it was really helpful for season 2 and the first part of season 3. Unfortunately, the book only went up to 1998, so I had to go back over to using Wikipedia and other sources for the more recent elections.
Opposed the anti-communist movement's tactics and would ensure that the Catholic wing of the New South Wales government remained with the main party. In a similar manner,
yeah, again, I'm pretty sure that's a Grayscale image. That's not not an actual historical image. Again, that's another Grayscale image that's not been that's not historical.
The anti-communists began to set up party branches in these states and would run against the Labor Party in the upcoming federal elections. Out of all the states, Western and South Australia were the least impacted due to their low number of Catholic Labor members there. The anti-communist forces would rebrand themselves as the Democratic Labour Party, or DLP, and began to gain support with Labour's traditional Catholic voting base. Evatt knew that without the support from
Oh,
the
so it's like
Labour was not going to
universal
win
basic
the
income.
election.
So it's not a
In
free
an act of
income that every
desperation,
citizen gets.
Evatt
It's
offered
whether
to
they have a
resign,
job or
but
not. It's
the DLP
basically
merged back with the main
oh
Labor
no,
Party.
basically getting a
However, his
job
offer was refused.
won't force
Due
them
to
to give up
almost losing
welfare.
his seat at Barton in the previous
Certain welfare
election,
doesn't
Evatt would move to
terminate
the
once you
safe
get a
Labor
job.
seat
Like
of Hunter
I'm
to avoid being kicked out of Parliament.
Like
The
I know
22nd
people, I
of
know
November
job
will
seeker
be the chosen date for this election.
doesn't
It would be a
necessarily
major
get
milestone in
terminated as soon as you get a
Australian
job.
elections, being the first to be televised. Menzies would appear in interviews, where his experience as a radio broadcaster would transfer over well, appearing very confident on the small screen. Meanwhile, Evatt and his colleague Arthur Calwell would take part in debate with coalition ministers William McMahon and the not yet drowned Harold Holt. Oh, whoops, spoiler warning.
Hey, I did put the spoiler one in there,
was
so you can't complain.
Robert Menzies with another gain of 2 seats, which brought the coalition up to 77 seats. This was the first time in Australian history that an incumbent party won seats twice in a row. This gain strangely came in the face of a swing against the coalition in the two-party preferred.
Yeah, it happened just like in 1987.
Thanks to the work of the QLP and the DLP, Evatt had lost even more seats, now only hold a measly 45, a number smaller than what they had won back in their 1949 defeat. Both the DLP and QLP saw turnouts in the first preferences of 7.8 and 1.6% respectively. This was not enough to score either party a seat in the lower house. However, the DLP was successful in retaining its 2 senators, ensuring it to have some presence in government. Fun
So it is
fact,
universal
being
basic
the first to be
income.
televised, this
Yeah,
election also saw the
I
first
know
use
about
of
it,
an expert
Harry,
panel.
from the US
Led by
election.
ABC
It was a
presenter
topic
Charlton,
brought up by
this
some of
panel
the
would include
candidates
political
that you can
experts
just
as well as representatives
just to give.
from each major
The idea of
party
how to be called capitalism, but
This
it doesn't
included
start from
former
zero.
Labour
So you
member
basically always have
Nick
money,
representing
but if you
Labour,
want a
and
decent
William
amount of money, you
McMahon,
need to start working
representing
for
the
it.
coalition, and Jack Kane standing in for the DLP. This panel would discuss the campaign as well as the result tally as it came through, and together they would identify what this election result meant for Australia. And today it has now become a staple of any election, be it state or federal. This election would also see former Prime Minister Arthur Fadden finally step down and leave Parliament after 17 years leading the Country Party. He would be succeeded by Victorian John McEwen, who, elected unopposed, would take the de facto position of Deputy Prime Minister under Menzies, only 17 years after originally running for the position back in 1941.
Yes, we'll mention Anthony a bit later, John. Do you remember
1961.
he appears in the 1993 election?
1961 would mark the 12th year of coalition rule.
Jeez Louise,
After
they're
spending
still
the
going.
entire 50s in opposition, Labour was determined to win. This time Labour was banking their money on a new face to win both swing voters as well
They
as their
banked on the
all-breakaway
wrong
Democratic
face.
Labour Party peers. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Robert Menzies continued to dominate politics. As
I
Australia's
watched a
longest
bit of
serving
Friendly
Prime Minister.
Geordies, obviously, because he's one of the ones that covers it. If there's any other ones out there, I'll be open to listen to it. Like, obviously, I watch a bit of Kevin Rudd's YouTube channel, but most of the time it's actually just Twitter and Facebook. I
After the
tend
quick
to
shock in the market,
talk with fellow ideologues as opposed to YouTube.
And Menzies was yet again riding on a strong economy. During this time period, the
Arguably,
Menzies
more
government
political content I watch from
increased funding for
most political
university
content I watch from
education
YouTube is
grants,
US based because there just isn't that much Australian stuff. There's a few non-partisan stuff like Ozpol Explains, which I wonder if I should ought to see if I can get a chance to catch up with him sometime and have a talk.
Federal public services headquarters to Canberra from their respective state capitals, as well as introduce schemes to make life-saving pharmaceutical products easier for people to access. Due to his relatively successful fifth term, Menzies looked
Like,
relatively
I'm not
strong
sure.
in the
On
first
Facebook, I
election
partake in the Common Sense Brigade, if you've ever heard of that group. And I follow a lot of Labour politicians on Twitter because they tweet quite a bit.
Realising that he was never going to beat Menzies, Labour leader
ABC's
H.B.
News in
Evans
Depth
seeks to
channel is
retire
good.
from
Yeah, I
Parliament.
do watch a bit of that. I think I'm
Attempting
subscribed to them on
defeat by exit
Facebook.
from Canberra,
I also
New South
enjoy
Wales
what's
Premier
it Thursday
and
night's
friend of
Media
Evans,
Watch.
Bob
I always
Petzold,
find that.
appointed
Although normally it's
position of
not
Chief
super
Justice
political.
of New
Normally
South
it's
Wales,
just
thus avoiding
finding
the
funny
event
stuff in the
to
news.
flat out resign. Unfortunately, Evatt's new appointment did not
What
go
about
as smoothly
Sydney
with New South
Watson
Wales
and Daisy
government.
Cousins?
Evans Attorney General
Might have heard of those names, but I'm not too sure.
To take the role of
They're
Chief
stars.
Justice,
Okay.
citing his poor health as one of the many reasons, and would not move the nomination of Evatt despite being the Attorney General.
I never understood why Evatt even ran in 1958 or why he was still around. It was kind of like, geez Louise, this guy's getting a little
Chief
old.
Justice of New South Wales. Despite gaining the role, Downing's concerns would be proven correct, as Evatt would prove to be a poor Chief Justice and would retire only 2 years after taking the position. He would eventually pass away on the 2nd of November 1965 at the age of 71. At 8 years and 241 days, Evatt would become the longest-serving Labour leader to have never become Prime Minister.
And the
Evatt
longest-serving
would be
opposition
succeeded
leader
by
to never
former
become Prime
Sheffield
Minister.
Cabinet Minister Arthur Calwell. Calwell was a Victorian who had joined federal parliament in 1940 and had served as the Minister for Information and Immigration while under Shifley, and then later as Deputy Leader under Evatt. Calwell's ascension to leader came as no surprise to anyone. However, his new replacement as Deputy would. Calwell wanted the experienced Eddie Ward as his deputy, but he would lose to some random young upstart politician.
Evatt
by
could
the
become a
name of
president.
As a Roman Catholic,
Could have become
Cornwall
president
hoped to
of the
win
world,
the
but not
support
prime
of the
minister for
breakaway
other
DLP
countries.
members.
Yeah, Evatt's story is a story of great success throughout the
Australia.
40s and great
Upon taking
failures
the
during
role
the
of Labour
50s.
he would immediately begin the early stages of discussion with the DLP to bring the two parties back together. However, by the time the 1961 election came around, the two parties remained divided, and the DLP would continue to funnel votes to the coalition.
Let's
For the
just say
first
my
time in
parents
almost a
are
years,
passionate about who
Labour
they
had
vote
several
for.
events
They're
turn
not
out in
they're not
favour.
they're not
The
swing
first was the
voters or
small recession that hit the
apathetical.
nation right
They do
around
have
the
political
election.
ideologies, but
This
they're
saw
not
a small
as
amount of
political as
public
me.
support swing away
They're
from the
not
coalition
super
and
open about
towards the Labour
politics.
Party. The other was
A
shocking
good example
difference
is
to the
I
Labour
have
Party
issues with
listed in the Herald.
talking to people who have a vastly different political ideology to me. They don't.
With the positive turn of events, Cornwall would push a strong campaign, hoping to finally topple the 12-year-old Menzies government, and with that, the election would occur on the 9th of December 1961. And the winner was... Initially, it wasn't clear who had won. A substantial swing of 4.6% in the two-party preferred saw seat after seat across the country fall to the Labour Party, and it looked like Cornwall might have finally succeeded in toppling the 12-year-old coalition government. Eventually, it came down to
Do you
two
meet many young
seats.
AOP members whose
Bruce
parents
in
are also
Victoria,
conservative?
Major Honour of
I
the
haven't
Minister,
really asked
and
them
Morton
about their
in Queensland.
parents, so I
Bruce
wouldn't
would
know.
narrowly be retained by future Liberal
Imagine the
Democrat
DLP
Peter
and
Snedden.
non-communist
Thanks in
ALP
part to
merged and
DLP
Lang became
preferences.
PM.
The QLP voters would help James Killen retain
I'm not sure
ownership
that would have
of the
happened.
coalition, and thus Menzies would retain 62 seats along with the Prime Ministership, despite for a third time losing the two-party preferred at 49.5. And you thought America was bad.
Yeah, there it
Cornwall
goes.
would also end up with 62 seats. However, the seats of the Northern and Capital Territories had limited voting power and did not count towards forming government. They would later become full seats in 1966. Thus, Cornwall had officially only won 60 seats. Despite the loss, Cornwall had brought the Labour Party within striking distance again, and he would continue as leader of the Labour Party into the 60s to challenge the incumbent Liberal coalition. Come
It's a
back
shame
next
we
time
didn't
to the
step down
election
there
of
and let Whitlam take over.
1963. Okay, last election with this guy.
Oh yeah,
I
the funny
swear.
opening. Do people even find that funny?
Robert Menzies and the coalition as a whole were very
Oh,
concerned
dear.
about their prospects of winning the next election. They had barely retained government after the 1961 election and now only held a two-seat majority in the lower house. Due to their slim majority, the coalition found themselves having to make concessions to the Democratic Labour Party in order to gain their support in the Senate. This saw the Menzies government give millions of pounds in the form of aid to private Catholic schools after several of them closed down due to a lack of funding. This caused a debate in Parliament.
Menzies, Emperor
Despite
God
being a
King of
Catholic
Australia.
himself,
Yeah, I can
Labour
imagine
opposition leader Arthur Cornwall opposed the funding policy, believing that private schools should rely entirely on their own self-funding.
that. And this is
Catholic
where
school
Labour's
funding
biggest
wasn't going to
problem.
be
They
the only
put their
policy
principles
affecting
ahead
this
of what's
election.
popular.
Another would be the establishment of a communications facility by the United States.
Howard
near
learned to
Exmouth,
pluck his
Western
eyebrows from
Australia.
Menzies, yeah.
This station would allow both the United States and Australia to communicate and coordinate their navies anywhere within the Indian Ocean and West Pacific. The establishment of such a base came with much controversy due to sovereignty implications, as Australia would be letting a foreign power use its soil to conduct its military. A military, I might add, with nuclear capabilities. While the
the
coalition
infamous
supported the
nuke cannons.
establishment of the facility, the Labour Party was divided. In March 1963, the Labour executives would host a conference in Canberra to decide the party's stance on the facility issue. Cornwall and his deputy Gough Whitlam would be summoned to the conference. However, since neither of them were members of the executive, they would wait in the lobby
Whitlam
of the
said
venue
about
before being
Cornwall,
summoned to
he
hear
was
the
a
verdict.
socialist
The
from
two
a
were then
great
captured by
depression running
journalist
in-
Alan
yes.
Reid, who published
Yeah,
a
I
photo in
mentioned
the
that as
Daily
well.
Telegraph showing the two waiting for the verdict outside the conference room. In his article, Reid claimed the Labour Party was ruled by 36 faceless men, who were neither elected nor responsible to the people of Australia.
By the way, Alan Reid
This
was a
article
massive
would immediately
anti-Labour
be
guy,
seized
so I
by
wouldn't
the
be surprised if he
coalition
would
and
post
used as a
something like
political
that.
weapon to attack Cornwall and the Labour opposition. And with Cornwall on the defensive, Menzies took the initiative to call another early election for the 30th of November 1963. The Labour leader was facing other problems aside from the Daily Telegraph article. Cornwall was finding his public popularity declining. His opposition to the Catholic school funding.
It's funny
made
I'm
him
playing
very
From Russia with
unpopular
Love as the
with the
background
Catholic
music in this
community,
section,
to the
because I
point
think
where
I
during a
checked and
mass,
like
Cornwall was attended
very
by St.
few
Francis
Bond
Xavier,
films
his
ever
patron.
allied in an
The
election
opposition
year. I
leader
think I
would
was
sit through an entire
as someone who's a bit of a
sermon
fan
on
of
the
Bond. I
sinfulness
found it
of
kind of
voting
funny
for
as a
Labour.
random fact.
He
It's
also
like
lost the support of the Sydney Morning Herald.
most
who went
Bond
back to
films were
supporting
released in
the
a year when there
coalition.
wasn't an election.
The final nail in the
Like,
coffin
how
for
on earth is
Cornwell's
that
campaign
possible?
came
I
when
don't
current
know.
US President John F. Kennedy was assassinated just days before the election. Cornwell misheard a statement that Menzies somehow held the ALP responsible for the assassination of Kennedy, which led Cornwell to issue an angry press statement to accusations never made. This election would also see the QLP merge with the DLP, strengthening the breakaway party and giving it a united nationwide presence to push its agenda. And the winner was... Yet again, Robert Menzies won, picking up 10 seats to hold 72, thus giving the coalition a comfortable 22-seat majority in the lower house. Cornwell's Labour seat count was again reduced back to 50 seats, and for a 7th time in a row they would remain in opposition. The result of this election led to calls for Cornwell to resign, as his unpopularity as leader was believed to have been the cause of Labour's loss. His deputy Gough Whitlam would lead these calls. However, Cornwell refused to step down, citing that Evatt had 3 election attempts, and thus he should have 3 attempts as well. Meanwhile, on the other side of
that
Parliament,
doomed
the
Labour
coalition
to be in
debated
opposition
with
for
their
another
leader as
10
well.
years.
A month after the election, Robert Menzies turned 69 years old, thus becoming the oldest Prime Minister in Australian history. And at such an old age, discussions began whether Menzies should retire from Parliament and pass the role to someone younger. As for the DLP, despite the United Front, the party's first preference count dropped by over 1.2%, leaving them with 7.44% of the popular vote and no lower house seats. Fun fact, this election was the first election in which Indigenous Australians could finally vote nationwide, after amendments to the Commonwealth Electoral Act allowed Aboriginals to vote in Western Australia, Queensland and the Northern Territory. While they had already been eligible to vote in all other states and territories, this amendment would not make voting
What's the
compulsory,
ALP doing
and
about the
Indigenous turnout
swing
in
away from
elections would
them by
continue to
less
be low.
educated, lower income electorates?
Due to Menzies calling another early election, the Senate
I
and the lower
suspect
house
one
would
of
yet
the
again fall out
one
of
of the things
sync,
has been
and for the
a
next
bit of a
decade,
dumb
the
down
Senate
of
and the
their
lower house
campaign
elections would happen
slogans.
separately.
The big
Come back next
slogan
time,
going into this
election
election has
of
very much been the
1966.
Labour is on your side
By
slogan,
the
which I think is
mid-60s,
designed
the
to sort of
coalition had been in power for over
try
15
and win
years,
over people.
becoming the longest
Like, they say,
government
we
in
are on your
Australian
side,
history.
they're not on your side, as
Despite
opposed to this
7
whole,
continuous
you know,
election
we're
wins,
standing for these
Robert
policies and
Menzies
these
would not
policies
be
and these
contesting
policies,
this
which I
election.
think is
Instead, he would be relying on his successor to weather the stormy seas and
oh, sorry. I
think
can't
that's
talk
the
about
only
that anymore.
one
We got the
prime
water
minister
puns
episode?
coming up
You
now,
are
and I see
sure.
John Mess is already starting with his water puns. By the way, the surely mistaken actually wasn't in the original script. My brother helped add that one when he pointed it out. That I think it was like, you're solely mistaken. He's like, you should have put surely mistaken. I'm like, yes.
Despite his ever-increasing age, Menzies would continue to govern Australia through most of the coalition's 7th term in office. In this time, he would pass a few small reforms, including ending the open discrimination against married women in the public service, allowing them to retain their jobs after marriage. Despite making some
Oh,
small
66,
policy
your
changes,
favourite. Yeah, it was
Menzies would
definitely one of
also
my better
start a major
ones.
Political engagement, which would define politics for the next decade. After the Second World War, the nation of Vietnam found itself split into two, with a communist-ruled
Well, we've got-
north and an anti-communist ruled south. Sound familiar?
So I think we've got 2 at the moment. Let's
Since
see how
the
many more we
50s,
can
The
get.
United States have been supporting South Vietnam from northern insurgents.
I approve of the
The hope
dark
of the
humour
South
and
would
water
create a
puns.
Unified Vietnam under communist rule. In August 1964,
I always need to be careful with
USS
dark
Maddox
humour.
would be engaged by North Vietnamese naval forces. in
I'm pretty sure those are
the
American ships.
Tonkin incident. While this incident would later become the centre of a major US government controversy, at this point in time it would be used to increase the US's support of South Vietnam, in which over 200,000 US troops would be deployed to the region. As an ally of the United States and a fierce anti-communist, Menzies would also send troops to assist the US in Vietnam. Menzies would adjust Australia's conscription policy in a similar manner to former Prime Minister John Curtin, by claiming that the Southeast Pacific was in Australia's sphere of influence, of defence. To avoid another 1917 constitutional crisis, Menzies would include an opt-out clause where conscripts could choose to remain within Australia's borders if they so desired.
I like doing
However,
a
this
Ted
would be
Kennedy
his last
video
independent
saying
decision.
water under the...
In December 1965, Menzies turned 71, and he would begin discussions with his close allies at home and in
I believe
Canberra about
Menzies
his
was the
intentions to
oldest
retire
Prime
from
Minister we
Parliament.
ever had in terms
Another
of
statement would be made in
being
January
Prime Minister
next
at
year,
age
with
as
the
opposed
first
to being
ever political
elected.
press conference shown on TV.
I am now 71.
This was a very long conference. I had to splice it a lot.
By the due date of the next election, and I'm assuming that it will occur at the due time, I would be 72. I couldn't see myself at 72, I couldn't see myself
Yeah.
saying to the people of Australia, I want you to give me another term.
The transfer of power within the Liberal Party would go over very smoothly, as seen with Menzies' successor, Harold Edward Holt, being elected unopposed.
There was actually a
as the
coloured
17th
photo of
Prime Minister
Holt I could have
of
used,
Australia.
but it was very low res,
Born in
and I couldn't
1908,
find colour
Holt
photos of
was
the
the
next few
first
Prime
promotion
Ministers,
to Prime
so I
Minister,
purposely kept
with
him
all
black and
previous
white just to
Prime
keep it
Ministers being born before the
consistent.
country even
Oh,
existed.
you can't show you that
Only
photo,
took
that's the
us
photo I'm using for my
65
thumbnails.
years. Holt swam into Canberra in the
Oh, no.
1965 Falconer by-election at the
Oh,
age
dear.
of 27, making him the youngest parliamentarian at the time. Over his 30-year career in federal politics, Holt
Oh, dear.
freestyled his way up the ranks of the Liberal Party, becoming Minister for Labour and later Treasurer after Fadden.
I forgot how bad I was
As
with the water
Treasurer, Holt
puns.
would establish Australia's new currency, the Australian dollar, as well as work closely with Menzies as deputy leader. Holt's ascension to
Oh,
Prime Minister
jeez.
came with a rather small
Menzies
splash,
swam off
with
into
most
the
current
sunset and
cabinets
retired.
retaining their positions. In his first year as PM, Holt would bring about major immigration reform, which sought to wash away large amounts of the white Australia policy. Gone with the extended naturalisation period.
Yeah, you know what? Now I'm realising maybe this actually might be my favourite election video. I forgot how funny
The
it
result of this
was.
policy saw waves of Asian immigration.
I actually was concerned about using the term waves of Asian immigration because it has negative connotations.
Holt would also see Australia turn its attention away from Britain and towards nations in the local area, specifically the United States. In 1966, US President Lyndon B. Johnson became the first US president to visit Australia. He
My
would
bad,
maintain a
20
close
water
relationship with
puns.
Holt. Holt would continue Australia's support towards the Vietnam War by sailing additional troops to the region to assist. He did this despite declaring that Australia would not be increasing its military commitments. While visiting the US, Holt would make the following address, demonstrating Australia's and America's alliance.
That you have an admiring friend, a staunch friend, that will be all the way with LBJ.
Holt had meant the statement as a gesture of goodwill, making
Well, if
use
you're
of
gonna go,
LBJ's
you gotta
election
waterwagon.
campaign slogan. However, his critics saw it as a form of
Howard Holt was
intimidation
probably
and would
one of the
attempt
most
to find
famous
the
prime
anti-war
ministers
sentiment
overseas
that
just
began
because
to
of how
grow in Australia.
weird his
Trying to take
disappearance
advantage
was.
of the anti-war movement would be the Labour Party, still under the leadership of Arthur Calwell. Despite being deeply unpopular with the public, Calwell refused to step down as leader and hoped to use the anti-war
Colwell was
movement
probably my
to
least
comeback
favourite Labour
after
leader.
Labour's poor
Okay,
showing in the last
Frank Tudor's
election.
probably worse, but at least Frank Tudor
Unfortunately,
didn't
Calwell's
stay
1966
around to
election
lose some more
campaign would be
elections.
marred in conflict. In 1964,
I know his
Australia
daughter
faced three
fiercely
standalone Senate
defends him,
elections
but
in which Labor would perform poorly,
no.
losing a seat to former Queensland Premier and now DLP Senator.
She sure should have
Who
halted
would later
more.
become leader of the breakaway party. Despite originally pushing for unification, by
Oh
1965,
dear, this is
talks between the
I was falling
ANC
asleep a
and
bit there. I think I'm
DLP
definitely
continued
awake now
demands
with these
relating to
ones.
getting top leadership positions in the party, and thus the two
What's with
parties
those
would remain
suits?
divided.
They look like
Meanwhile, in the
pajamas.
same year, Deputy Labour leader Gough Whitlam successfully changed the Labour platform to also end support of the White Australia policy, as well as give the federal Labour leader and the deputy leader seats in the Labour executive. He did this
One of the biggest
against
problems I had to
Calwell's
agree with the
will,
Labour Party is
and
how
the two's
undemocratic the
relationship
party is
deteriorated.
itself.
Eventually,
They've
Calwell
definitely
moved to
improved a
expel
lot
Whitlam from
since
the party
with
after Whitlam broke
primaries
ranks
and
and
stuff
denying
these
public
days. But
school
oh
funding.
boy,
Whitlam would narrowly
there was a
survive
UK
this
Labour
expulsion
MP who
move, and
disappeared
in
and
response,
turned up in
countered with
Australia.
something modern-day
And
Australians
it's like,
are all too familiar with.
whoever you
leadership
done the
skill
Wikipedia
motion.
article or something
However,
on that,
this
that
would
sounds
fail
interesting.
With two-thirds backing Calwell. The election
love
was
this
set
stuff.
for the 25th
So,
of November.
For those who don't know,
1966, and Calwell would make
Spits and
several appearances
Specs
at
is
anti-war
a
rallies,
popular
attempting
was
to drum up
was a
support for the
popular
Labour campaign.
musical quiz show
After
here in
leading one of
Australia,
these rallies
and they
at the
also it was called
Moresby
Spits and
Town
Specs
Hall
because the
in
main theme they
Sydney,
used the Bee
Calwell
Gees
would
Spits
get
and
into a
Specs.
government car
So I thought it was a good idea to use the
hotel.
Spits and
Would
Specs
then
as
be
the
approached by
song
19-year-old
here since it
Peter
has a
Hogan,
connotations
who
with
would proceed
Australian
to pull a
culture.
.22 caliber rifle out of his coat and open fire on the opposition leader.
Yeah, this makes it even crazier. It was an
Calwell looking at
assassination
the
attempt
window
in
of
this election.
the time, and it would prevent the bullet hitting him. However, he was still hit with multiple shards of glass. Koken would immediately be arrested, and Calwell would be rushed to hospital in the first attempt.
Pretty
to
sure
commit
Koken is the first person
assassination
I talk
the
about in these
nation's
videos
history.
who's actually still
Koken would
alive.
be given a life sentence and would eventually be sent to a psychiatric hospital. Calwell, who had not been seriously harmed, would be dismissed from hospital, and the next day would continue campaigning. Years later,
Where are
Calwell
the
would eventually
girls?
visit the detained
Where
Koken,
are
and the
they?
two would make amends. Koken would be released in 1976 and would go on to have a successful career in literature,
He
becoming a
basically,
renowned
I think,
author, and today
he was a
lives in
bit
Brisbane.
well,
Now let's get back
not
to the
smart in the
election
head.
results.
And
the winner was
he basically
Robert Menzies
just wanted to make
and
a
the Cobble
scene,
Hole.
and he
Sorry,
thought Arthur
force
Coyle
of
wasn't
habit.
popular enough that
In
he
a
could get away
giant
with
blue
killing
wave
him.
of an election
Yep, there we go.
Holt had picked up 10 seats. The Holt
Yeah, so I think it was because Corbell was hated. He wanted to make a scene,
Holt's numbers
and he
were
wasn't
also
very
boosted with the
sane
seat
in
of
the
the
head.
Northern Territory, as the territories had now become
Yes,
full
Adam
of
Hills
seats,
hosted
increasing
Spits
the
and
total number
Specs.
of seats
It's a great
in
show.
Parliament to 104.
Actually, speaking of that,
Despite winning more seats
which one's the
than
British one? That's
Labour
you,
MPs,
Thomas, isn't it?
Holt received little credit
Do you actually
for the
watch it?
local
Have you actually watched
election
Adam Hill's
Cornwall.
The Last
approval
Leg,
rating
that show he
after
does
6
in
years had
Britain?
fallen to a pathetic
Britain,
24%.
the one with
According to
I
one
forget the
poll.
other two's names,
Cornwall,
but
who
it's
had
the one with
only
all the
won 41
amputees.
seats, half of what Holt
Curious to
had
know
won,
if you've
would
ever
finally see
seen
the
that
writing
show.
on the wall and resign as leader the following year.
I
Cornwall
think it was The
a man
Last
out
Leg is the
time.
name of the
A
show,
depression-era
which Adam Hills
politician
moved on
woman
to
in the
after finishing
60s
Spits and
who
Specs.
still supported the White Australia policy in an era of progressivism. Fun fact:
An assassin went on to be a successful writer. I
Minister
know my father. Yeah, it's the opposite of Hitler. You know, Hitler goes from being a painter to a mathematical genocide. We keep going an assassin going to be a writer.
Cornwall's resignation, the door was finally open for Whitlam to take over the party, which he did. Beating out left-wing candidate Dr. Jim Cairns, Whitlam would become the 11th leader of the Labour Party and would begin to implement big changes to the federal party to modernise it for the upcoming elections. Come back next time for the election of 1969. After years of seeing the same faces again and again, seeing two completely new party leaders this time is kind of refreshing. For this final election of the 60s,
And one Liberal Party
both
lie I
parties would
probably
attempt to
would have
use
liked.
their stature as fresh new faces to win over voters who are becoming increasingly weary of how stagnant politics had
Gotta
become.
get some nice videos now. I think Whitlam was from the left faction, but I'm not entirely sure. Thomas, just we have quite a few Aussie celebs and comedies in the UK. Yeah, because they know they can't get very far here. There's only 22 million of us compared to like 56 million British people.
Never experienced a Labour government. Hoping to capture the hearts and minds of these Australians would be the radical new leader of the Labour Party.
Oh, okay.
Whitlam. Oh, sorry. Gough Whitlam.
Yeah, that wasn't as good as the water puns.
Previous leaders had nearly all come from the workforce and unions. Whitlam, on the other hand, had come from a prestigious college.
Like, I'm a
and had
non-factional
undergone
Labour
6 years of
member,
service
but
in the Air Force before joining Parliament
as I say,
in
it's
1952.
I don't quite get the
Whitlam brought new
factions.
insight to the Labour Party. Since the party's creation in 1901, the large working class that had been the backbone of the Labour voting base had become a prosperous middle class. These middle
Wasn't
class
a
citizens
socialist,
held
but
much more
still
liberal views
an
and were far
aggressive
less
social
supportive of the
democrat.
socialist ideals that had originally given
Yeah, well,
birth to the
I've
Labour
often seen
Party.
Whitlam as one of the persons who started to move Labour more as a liberal
In an attempt to win over the
social
Labour
party and
voters.
less
His first move would be
a
to wrestle
socialist
control of the Labour Party's
economic
policy
party, but
agenda away from the executive and unions
back
and give it
yeah,
to the elected
just something I'm
Parliament.
a bit angry at
He
the
also
party for
brought
doing a
about
bit
much
more
more
too much these
progressive
days and
agenda
putting
with
social
his
politics
Labour
first. But
leaders,
back in these
promoting
days,
the
it wasn't too
creation of
bad.
Aboriginal
Partly
land, as well as being more
partly
open to
because
globalisation.
I think
Whitlam
like
was
there was
opposing
already
Labour
strong social
policy.
policies at this
In
point.
Parliament, Whitlam would reorganise
They hadn't been
Labour's front
privatised all yet.
bench to form the first true Australian shadow cabinet.
Probably should have done a
Involved
gooch
individual
Whitlam.
members of the opposition, taking up
and
shadow ministerial
pull out a
positions
gun
to oppose
sight.
the equivalent government cabinet minister. This allowed the Labour Party
Really,
to
I'm
more
part of the
effectively
Moray
government,
Field branch
and
and
soon
trying to
Labour
vote
was
for
finding itself
people
winning debates in
from the
Parliament, and for the
soft
first
right.
time since
Okay.
13 years, the party began to look like a
Yeah, like
genuine
in
alternative
South
government.
Australia, unfortunately, it's
The
pretty much
resurgence of the
right
Labour
dominated
Party
here.
put
I
pressure
go
on
to
the coalition,
caucus meetings
led
and
by
basically the
Prime
right
Minister
just
Harold
outvotes
Holt.
the left on
Despite winning a
everything.
huge majority in the election of
Like, although actually I
Holt
kind of
was
enjoy the
quickly
left. I actually went to one of their
finding
meetings a
himself
while
in
ago, and
Southeast Asia,
unlike the
Vietnam
right, the
War
left talk a lot
continued.
more about policy than the right does. The right's more just talking about
War movement gaining
you know
strength. Despite being a strong
current
diplomat on
incidences,
the
while the
world
left's talking
stage,
about
Holt was
how
not an effective
how to solve those
prime minister at home.
incidences.
His government was drenched in multiple controversies.
I do think you do need
including
factions
fighting
because it helps
against
people of
freedom,
like-minded ideas
two,
find
a mishandling
people
of
to
military incident,
connect
as well as
together
the
and stuff.
misuse of government aircraft. Unlike his predecessor,
Like, I'm not entirely against what
Holt was
like
known
Hawke
for a strong
did,
party
like you know,
discipline,
stacked the
and dissent
party
began to
evenly.
bubble up within the party, with multiple
Where does
members
Whitlam fit in
becoming
your
very
all-time
critical
favourite
of
Labour leaders?
this,
I
combined with
recall
other
he does
controversies,
rather a
led
lot
to
in a
the
very
poor
short time.
performance
Yeah,
by the
it's hard to say.
government in
Whitlam's
the 1967
got a lot of good and a lot of
which the
bad.
coalition
I might,
won 2 seats.
I wouldn't
This
tell you where I'm
also
ranking right
generated
now, but I
concerns
might
that
get
Holt
back
was
to you
not
on that.
locally
I might do it
elected
as a video
to
after
the
after the 2019 election as
Hoping to
a
get away from
ranking
the
of all
rapids
the Labour
Canberra,
leaders.
Holt would travel to his holiday home in Portsea, Victoria, in December 1967. While on holiday, Holt would stop by the remote Cheviot
Yeah,
Beach
John Meza, that's a
before
good way
his
of putting it,
companions
I'd
to do some
say.
swimming, as Holt was an experienced swimmer
Whitlam basically made a lot of big changes in a very short period of time, which caused a lot of economic turmoil. He also made some very poor economic decisions when it came to things like money financing, as we cover in 1975.
Holt, on the other hand, continued to go further out to sea, where he would disappear beneath the waves.
Whitlam also probably needed to do a bit more austerity during the oil crisis than he did, which led to massive inflation, unfortunately.
And would alert them to what had just happened. An hour later,
don't the Liberals say that about every Labour government? Yeah, but it's somewhat true in the Whitlam's case. I'd say they were overstating it especially during the Rudd-Gillard era. That was just them speaking out of their arse, in my opinion. But
however, no corpse was ever found.
Yeah, Whitlam definitely had economic ineptitudes, unfortunately.
111 today, we can quite confidently presume that he is no
Any conspiracies around Holt's disappearances? We're not going there. This is factual.
Would take over as Prime Minister until the Liberal Party could determine a new leader. And
do you have a favourite on the right? Do you have favourites on the right side? Do you mean like on the non-Labour parties?
McEwen would be the last Prime Minister.
Because if so, I was saying John Gordon is probably my favourite Labour.
Losing both his parents,
that's probably my favourite Liberal Prime Minister.
McEwen would win the seat of Echuca in 1934.
There you go, Harry. It's your hometown.
And would end up representing the seat of Murray. After 33 years in Parliament, the longest for any Australian politician, he had become Prime Minister at the age of 67, making him the oldest person to take the role of Prime Minister. While McEwen led the nation, the Liberal Party had to decide a new leader. The most obvious contender was Treasurer and Deputy Party Leader William McMahon. However, there was just one problem. McEwen hated McMahon and would use his role as country party
Gordon
leader
was against land rights, though.
Force McMahon to withdraw his
Is that like the Aboriginal land
door
rights?
opened for Senate leader John Gorton to take on the role, and he would become the 19th Prime Minister of Australia. Due to Westminster tradition, Gorton needed to be a member of the lower house to be Prime Minister. Luckily, one seat just happened to be vacant.
I mean, he tried to get a loan from a Pakistani banker who actually happens to be friendly to his best friend's uncle. Oh dear.
Due to being enrolled in a different electorate.
What a
Due to having
surprise.
to resign from the Senate to run for the lower house, Gorton is the only Prime Minister to have been a senator, a member of Parliament.
Yeah, so Aboriginal land rights,
between resigning and winning
as they like,
Higgins,
obviously,
a member of
I wasn't
the
going to say Gordon
chamber.
was going to be great.
Gorton was an interesting Prime Minister.
But weren't most
He was
Liberal
very
Prime Ministers at the time against Aboriginal land
as can be
rights?
seen in this video taken just after the Apollo 11 spacecraft had landed
Also, this
on
was the
moon.
60s, so like Aboriginal rights weren't exactly what they are today.
Well, there are many
Unfortunately.
and varied, but I have a prepared formal statement, which I think perhaps I could read, because that would put in short compass the general impressions that I have. And this is the statement. The first landing of man on the moon, is a success which excites the wonder and admiration of us all.
This helped to make Gorton look like a man of the people, and led to him being initially very popular as Prime Minister. However, his style was criticised by some as sloppy and
What do people think of John Gordon's more casual political style? I kind of liked it because it was kind of made him feel more humanist compared to all the fancy speeches of modern politicians. From my UK is a very unfair one. A lot of liberal PMs like Australia, Abbott and Morrison.
By the 25th of
Come
October,
to me as the biggest numbnuts I've ever seen. It's the problem. It's like politicians famously like to play their own country off against everyone else because one of the biggest ways to unite people around a common cause is to have a
Gorton
common
was also in
enemy.
favour of centralisation policies, which alienated him from powerful Liberal state leaders. He also began gaining a lot of enemies within his own party, who wanted him deposed as leader.
If you know why I like Gordon, I do not like William McMahon.
He ran a very strong campaign, pushing for change and an end to 2 decades of Liberal rule. This election would see a new seat added in South Australia, bringing the total number of seats in Parliament up to 125.
I think that Abbott, on a
And the
personal level,
winner
was way better than Morrison.
despite
I would
making
probably
70%
agree with that.
towards
I think
the Labor
Abbott
Party,
definitely has some
John
good,
Gordon
strong
and the
family
coalition
ties, and he's like,
with 66
as someone who's a
seats.
Christian, I
But
could
with the
definitely
loss of
see
16 seats, the
a lot
party
of
majority
Abbott's
would
more
be
Christian
crushed.
roots in terms of
Despite
personal
again
life
losing
being
two-party preferred,
quite good. I just
Gorton
think they
was
were
able to
just
hold on for 4
god
seats
awful in
Victoria
politics.
with the help of the DLP. Despite helping the coalition retain power for a 9th time, the DLP's first preferences continued to drop, and with it, its prospects of keeping Labor out of office. With a
Yeah,
gain of
like, I definitely think
18
there's definitely
seats,
a
Whitlam
thing
had
about
not only brought the
politicians
Labor
speaking a bit
Party
more
back from
humanist these
oblivion,
days.
he had also
I also
said
think it's partly
that
because
he grew in
politicians come
favour
from an
a more
era
traditional
of
Labor
royalty
government.
where
With 59
all the royals
seats,
people used to
Whitlam would
speak with
continue
very
to push
posh
his
accents.
message that it's time for freedom.
Oh
Time
no.
for moving. It's time to begin.
We know what the next video is,
Yes,
don't
it's
we?
time. Come back next time. For
I
the
just look here at Santa Maria.
1972.
Yeah, too bad he didn't carry any of the economic policies of Santa Maria. You guys ready for the sing-along? I did worry I made this a little bit long before I started the sing-along part. You ready? Time for freedom. Time for moving. It's time to begin. Yes, it's time. Time for old folks. Time to show them. It's time to care. Yes, it's time. Oh, I love that. Was one of my best openings. It did not work in the later one, but it was funny then. And here's the thing of the US Empire meddling in Australia.
And now we're into the 70s.
No, 1990 maybe turned down. I did not like how it went in 1990, so I've stopped doing it.
Election, things had only gone worse for Prime Minister.
Oh yeah, Eagle Rock.
The coalition was full of
Runs and
dissent
we'll
and was
do
becoming
the Eagle
unfocused on
Rock.
policies after 20
I love
years
this
of
song.
government.
I can see why it was
While
considered one of the
Party
greatest
was
Australian
strong
rock songs
he
of
could
all
not deliver
time.
a strong result for the coalition in the 1970 Senate election, the last separate Senate
I'll
election.
take that over things that can only get
which saw
better
the
for the
party lose 2 seats,
I'll
with
take
one
that
going to
over
the
things that can only
Democratic
get better
Party
any
under
day
Vince
of the
Carey,
week.
who now had 5 seats in the Senate. With this poor result, support
Yeah,
for
classic
Gordon's leadership
smoking
began
in
to
office.
dwindle. Gordon would lose one of his biggest supporters. in the
2002 was when
Deputy
Gordon
Prime
passed
Minister
away, so
John
he was actually
Mccain,
alive
who
when I
left
was alive.
Parliament in 1971 after 36 years.
Unfortunately, you couldn't find any information on his death though, which was kind of unfortunate. Kind of died in quiet.
With McEwen out of the picture, the door was finally open for Deputy Liberal leader William McMahon to go for the Prime Minister's job. Previously, McMahon had been prevented from running for PM by McEwen's Country Party. However, with their new leader, there was nothing stopping
Doug
them
Anthony
from
only passed away last year.
leadership spill motion. The first, and sadly not the last, in history for a sitting government.
Oh, what's the significance of Eagle Rock? Oh, so Eagle Rock's is considered one of the most iconic Australian pieces in our history. That's why I was mentioning it.
On Gorton's leadership. This gave Gorton the casting vote to determine his own fate. Realising that staying would only bring about more problems, Gorton would vote against himself and thus step down from the top job, giving it over to McMahon. The leadership spill had been a disaster for the Liberal Party, and its approval rating would drop to its lowest point since World War II.
Oh, Gordon did join back under. Oh yeah, it would make sense to join under Houston. Do you want to, Gordon, Houston, and Turnbull are all sort of that same sort of liberal guy. They're all the progressive liberals who find out that their party is full of conservatives, leave, and then spend the rest of their time bashing their own party.
However, that was not going to be easy.
Because I follow Houston and Turnbull a bit on Twitter, and they basically spend most of their time just talking about how much they disapprove of the job Morrison's doing. I'm pretty sure both of them are voting Labour in the next elections.
The Party was focused and had a clear set of policy agendas it wished to implement, including ending Australia's involvement in Vietnam and eliminating university tuition fees, just to name a few.
Men and women of Australia, the decision we will
They're,
make for
like,
our
I prefer them over the generic
on the
Liberal
2nd
Prime
of
Ministers,
December
but they never
is
win.
a choice between the past and the future.
Whitlam would travel to Papua New Guinea and promise the territory independence in the event that his party won. He would also controversially travel to the People's Republic of China, with hopes of opening up an economic relationship between them and Australia. McMahon would attack Whitlam.
Yeah, but Houston also tried to run a PM with the annoying fight back scheme, but to be honest, they got that into power anyway, so who cares?
When only 3 days later, US President Richard Nixon would
No,
also
the song
visit
It's
China
Time.
and
Oh,
start
it was
trade
the reason why
relations
It's Time was quite a big song, Harry, was because
out of time.
it was the sort of the centerpiece of the campaign. I'll talk about it a bit later. So these snippets are taken from the ABC coverage. If you guys have seen the ABC coverage of this election, that's where I got this footage of Doug Anthony coming up. It's interesting. Both Conservative parties got defeated in New Zealand and Australia in 1972, and both got back into power in 1975.
Yours on the 18th of December or whatever it was. I said, thanks, Jack.
The campaign would see the Prime
That
Minister
sort of thing
temporarily
before
government's strong
heavyweight
record,
figures
as
leave
well
their
as some
party.
doubts in
Only
Labour's
happens after
ability to
Brexit.
govern
It really
after
happens ever in
23
the
years
UK.
of opposition.
Yeah, I think your party's a little bit
Whitlam would
more
take up
stable,
Lindsay's
partly because the
party
Liberal Party here
campaign
doesn't really
slogan,
stand
"It's
for
time to
anything.
change," and
at least the Tories in the UK actually, you know, are the Conservative Party. They're not the economically liberal party.
As well as other media personalities to now record the
Yeah.
famous It's Time jingle, which would prove to be a very catchy song and would even get the approval of some long-time Liberal voters.
So that's why Harry, It's Time is quite an important
Well, it
song.
must have felt like
It's also seen as a song
Gough
of
and
Labour's
the Labour Party had finally
re-emergence.
won, picking up 8 seats to hold 67, which gave them the first majority government in 23 years, with 52.7% of the two-party preferred. Despite the waves of support behind Whitlam,
I don't
the gains
get
made by
that
Labour
Turnbull
were
made
small
Morrison's
compared to
treasurer,
other government-changing elections.
even though unlike
In fact,
Labour, he
Whitlam's
personally
gains had
appointed
all
his
come
ministry,
from the
not the
eastern states,
caucus.
with Labour actually losing seats in South and Western Australia. Despite the loss of seats,
Interesting.
Whitlam had won and had pushed the Liberal coalition out of government and into opposition. McMahon, who had only won 58 seats,
I don't get the closest
would
Liberal
soon
got to
resign
splitting
from
was
the
probably
party a few days
1987,
after his election,
possibly.
and be replaced by Treasurer Billy Snedden, who would lead the first opposition
Labour and
Liberal
Tories have
government
been
since
here for
the
years,
40s.
leaving isn't any point.
McMahon is often remembered as one of Australia's
Yeah,
worst
I'd agree with that,
ministers,
Thomas.
a fact not helped by being the only Liberal Prime Minister to have a perfect electoral
Yeah, almost
record.
happened to be Scott Morrison
Or
as
by
well.
former Prime Minister John Gordon coming out years later to admit that he had voted for Labour in the election. However, some have defended McMahon as being unfairly scapegoated for an election loss which was all but inevitable for a government as old as the first Liberal coalition government. And his concession speech is often considered one of his best moments as Prime Minister.
Mr. Whitlam has obviously won, and he's won a handsome victory.
Fun fact, did you know that Doctor Doom from the 2005 Fantastic Four film is played by William McMahon's son Julian? Who was also starred in Home
To be honest,
Alone,
this
as
is
well as other
completely
short
irrelevant to
films.
politics. I just found this really
Now that
interesting.
Whitlam had won, he was
I'm not sure if any of you
expected to
guys
work
have watched
for organising ministers to the government. However, this would not
the
happen
old
for another 2
2004
weeks after the
Fantasy Four
election.
film. I actually enjoyed it
Not
quite a
prepared
bit.
to
I don't know
let
why people
Whitlam
hate that
go
film
any
so
longer,
much, but
Whitlam would race to Canberra with his
I would say
deputy
actually
James
you've got a
Barnard,
former Prime Minister's son literally playing the
as well as
villain.
the Governor General, Sir Paul Hasluck, only 3 days after voting had concluded, with counting still ongoing in certain seats. Together the two would take on all 27 current ministerial portfolios.
Plus,
for
the
2
first
weeks
past
until
the
a proper
post, new
cabinet
parties
was formed.
would rather do.
Whitlam stumped
Yeah,
the
it's a
first
shame that
Premier,
you're
Australia was in for a
you're
wild
unfortunately
ride,
not
and
very
Whitlam attempted
intelligent
reformulation, who had not seen a government change in over 2
political.
decades. However,
I know there was a vote to introduce preferential voting, but unfortunately a lot of people didn't know the importance of it in the UK and decided to vote against it, much to the dismay of the more politically minded people like yourself.
we were all too keen to see the Whitlam government fail before it had even started. Come back next time for the election.
Okay, 3 videos left.
When Whitlam took office in 1972, I don't think even he expected what was to come. From ambitious plans to a hostile Senate to a worldwide energy crisis, the next few years were going to be very interesting.
Can I ask a question? Are some of you guys watching these videos for the first time?
In 1972, Gough Whitlam had become a Labour.
Because I had presumed most of you guys had already
making
watched all these
3
videos
decades of
before.
coalition rule and becoming the 21st
My whole
Prime
family,
Minister of
bar
Australia. I'd
bare
traditionally
Labour
run the
voter
entire
unions, but
country
they all
with Deputy
supported Joe
James
Pukey
Barnard.
Peterson, no
Whitlam
joke,
would
because
form
he's
a
worse.
ministry with
Oh
all
yeah,
the
everyone keeps
much
talking
more
about
autonomy
Flo
than
for
the
some
Labour
reason. I
government
don't
and
get
the
why
previous Labour government.
Joe's wife was
And with
so
his full team accounted
such a
for,
big
he would
deal.
really get to work enacting his political agenda.
They went with
Straight from the
AV
get-go,
voting for the
Whitlam would end
referendum,
Australia's
but
conscription
I think
policy,
PR would have
would
been
pardon all incarcerated
more
draft
attractive.
dodgers, and
Yeah,
extended
like I
freedom
really
to
hope they
public
they do bring it back,
service.
because I
He
think
would
they've
also recognise the
like
People's
obviously
Republic of
Alaska
China.
and
Today,
Maine
Australian
have
rights
legalized it in
taken
the
part,
United
as well as
States, so
removed
it is showing that it is
forces
gaining
out of
traction.
South
Once people
Vietnam,
have it, they realize
which
it's a
would
way
force
better
Vietnam
system,
a few years
especially if you hate your main
Outside of
parties and want to
military
vote third
policy,
party.
Whitlam was passionate about social justice and would appoint former Labour leader H.V. Evatt's niece, Elizabeth Evatt, to the Commonwealth Council of Arbitration Commission to look into gaining women equal pay for equal work, as well as joining an international ban on the sports teams from the apartheid-run
I've watched
states
all
of South
post-World War
Africa
II
and
videos. Okay,
Rhodesia
cool.
from playing games in
So has
Australia.
anyone here
He would
not
also
seen these
fulfil his
videos
campaign
before?
promise to abolish university fees, as well as abolishing the death penalty, moving all death row inmates over to life sentences. Keeping up? Good, because we still have more to cover. In 1973, Whitlam decided Australia needed its own national anthem to reflect its own national identity. Previously, Australia had used the UK's anthem. Of
I wonder if people don't see the joke at this point. If people get the joke there.
The 1878 song
I purposely used
Advance
Comic
Australia
Sans to make it
proved to be
funnier.
the most popular, and so would begin a long decades fight between the old and new anthem, which would eventually be resolved in 1984.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that the
Bob
Tories are so
Ford,
popular at the
who would
moment in
make
the
Advance Australia
UK.
Fair the official anthem, and God Save the Queen, the royal anthem, to be used at events where a member of the British royal family is present. And
Oh, we
today
need
you
to
get
take
the
out
pleasure of listening
Prince
to it
Philip.
every time you watch one of my videos. However, Whitlam was doing too much. After 23 years in opposition, the Labour Party had begun to
Someone
see
said it's in
Australia's
core, which I
listen,
find strange.
and
Maybe
become
enjoying
more
a Champs
progressive Australia into a modern country as
Too
fast
bad
as
Flo's not
possible.
around to make him.
This resulted in a conservative backlash the likes that had never been seen before in Australian history, with a whopping 74% of people in one poll expressing that the government was doing too much. Along with
I think
this,
that's in the
Whitlam
UK.
found himself at increasing odds with the non-Labour eastern state governments, especially the Queensland coalition government.
There he is,
Party leader Joe
the infamous Premier himself.
over the Queensland-owned Torres Strait Islands of Boingu and Sabai.
Yeah, they're in the news recently because they're trying to stop Papua New Guineans from travelling to the island and spreading COVID or
showing
something.
a strong rejection of Whitlam's federal policies. And with this, the federal Liberal opposition took its chance to strike. After
Voting
McMahon
to
had stepped
preference
down,
or
the leadership of the
choice
Liberal Party would go over to Billy Mackey Snedden. Despite originating from a working-class family of Labour voters, Snedden would become a passionate Liberal supporter and later politician in 1955, where he would narrowly retain his seat of Bruce in the nail-biting 1961 election to now become leader of the Liberal Party. With help from the country and Democratic Labour Party,
I'm a Liberal lover.
Snedden
Interesting.
would be successful in curtailing Whitlam's agenda, and as polls continued to show a public opposed to Whitlam's ambitious policies.
I haven't shown you one there, but like, what's it with Labour
Prime
Prime Minister just towering over the Liberal Prime Ministers?
The biggest threat to the Labour Party was not the coalition,
Oh yeah, here comes
but
the
the
ABBA.
Democratic Labour Party. Despite originally forming to combat the communist elements of the Labour Party, the DLP now only seem to exist despite the Labour Party. Despite failing to keep
Could have
Labour
waited. Yeah, that's what I've heard
DLP
people
was
say.
about
If
to
Snedden
give
waited
up
6
and were
months, he
also
would have
keen to
won.
send the Labour Party back into opposition. Whitlam knew that if Labour hoped to
I
have
did
a
learn
fair
about
shot at
Churchill.
winning future elections, the DLP needed to go.
Did you see
Starmer
Lewis
would be their
Spears'
popular
video
senator
when he
and
made a
former
joke
Queensland
about
Premier Vince Gill.
Prince Philip
Whitlam knew the Irish Catholic senator
and was
was
told he
in a
died
dramatic
halfway?
position
No, I
after
didn't
having to resign
actually.
as party leader due to disagreements with the 4 other senators.
Maybe you need to put the link in the
Whitlam
chat.
appointed Australia's ambassador to Ireland.
Yeah, I do apologise about that photo. I showed a picture of a United Ireland. I do apologise. That is wrong. I should not have done that.
The second was to get Gear away from Canberra, depriving the DLP of a popular figurehead. This move caused a massive backlash not only from the DLP, who expelled Gear, but also the Conservative parties, who knew Whitlam was trying to open up more Senate seats so he could win the Senate in the upcoming election. The Queensland government would be successful in preventing the extra seat going up for re-election, and in Canberra, the Senate blocked Whitlam's supply bill, forcing him into a double dissolution election on the 18th of May, which would finally see a House and Senate election happen on the same day.
So many double
after 10
disillusions at
years.
this time, wasn't there?
Now, the government you elected for 3 years has been interrupted in mid-career. Our program has been brought
Is that Whitlam's wife? And there's Bob Hawke. I think that's probably Neville Rand or someone.
everything we've achieved, everything you expected of us, all this is suddenly threatened.
Okay, it was Fraser. Was Fraser quite large?
The actions of the men you rejected a mere 17 months ago.
You know, I remember when I met Sarah Hanson Young, the Green senator from my state. She is really small, but she definitely has a very big presence.
This election would also see the seat tally taken up to 127, as well as the voting age reduced from 21 to 18 years of age. And the winner was... To Snedden's surprise, Whitlam had won with 51.7% of the two-party preferred, and a net loss of only 1 seat, to now hold 66. This was likely due to Whitlam's incredible campaign skills, with slogans like, "Oh no, not Snedden," and "Give Gough a fair go," which portrayed the Liberals as obstructionist politicians with no agenda other than to oppose Labour. Snedden had picked up 3 seats, thanks to the increased seat count to now hold 61, with 48.3% of the two-party preferred. But his inability to concede defeat, claiming, "While we didn't win, we didn't lose at all," exposed him to mass criticism and led to calls for him to step down as leader, despite a somewhat positive result for his party. Meanwhile, the biggest loser of this election would be the DLP, who after facing a massive 7.55% swing against them in the Senate, would lose all 5 Senate seats, eliminating them from Canberra. And with Gare off to Dublin, the party would fall apart and would eventually dissolve 4 years later. The party that had
As
so long
there's one
been
thing about
joining
74 is
Labour
I'm very
preventing
glad
them
that
from winning elections
the
for over a
DLP was
decade
just
was
a
finally
wrecker party. They literally stood for nothing except Labour bad.
However,
I think they kind of deserve to be wiped out like that.
The effectiveness of a third party in the Senate to moderate the two main parties, and new parties would begin to form, hoping to emulate this power.
Oh, yes, that was Whitlam's wife.
Successfully become the
Bob
first Labour
Hawke
Prime Minister
with that
to win
70s
two
port. Yes,
However,
there's a reason why Hawke was popular.
And this would prove to be very consequential very soon. Come back next time.
Oh yes, AP Archives was definitely very useful. It's a shame that they've gone now. I think they fell apart, unfortunately, or they stopped getting funded because because Murdoch didn't want to give away free media.
Scandal, a new political crisis was forming on the other side of the planet. On
Still
one side,
full Trump there.
Edward Gough Whitlam, a man
Yeah, I didn't realise Gough is not actually his first name.
Brought them out the longest political drought and was now completely redefining Australia as Prime Minister.
Oh yeah, so there's
on the other side, 45-year-old
there's
John
Margaret
Fraser, the recently elected sixth leader of the Liberal
and there's
Party,
him with his wife.
who would use his political
Yeah, right. He is
influence
actually
to
quite a
silence
lot
the
taller than
government
everyone
and
else.
force a political deadlock. And between these two would be the
My
recently
grandparents were
appointed Governor
for
General of Australia,
one,
61-year-old Sir John
one and more.
Robert
Sorry, I
Kerr,
can't read
a
that.
former Chief
Victoria and
Justice
Fraser
of
was the
New South
MP.
Wales.
They've been a couple of times.
What would
They were
unfold
trying to find
in
his parent.
1975
Who was
would go
involved.
down in infamy as one of the most
How was Bob
controversial
Hawke a
moments in
union leader
Australian
when he looks like a
history,
bloody
which
bitch?
people on all sides of government
Come on,
had
guys, we haven't even got to the
choices
Hawkies
made
yet.
and their outcomes. As for me, I will attempt to cover this story as apolitically as possible as we look into the election of 1975.
So, you know how they sometimes those TV series have like a movie halfway through? I wanted to try and capture that with 1975. I wanted to make it that sort of special one. That's why I did the alternate opening.
In 1974, Whitlam and his Labour Party defied the odds to win the double dissolution election, and thus a second term as Prime Minister, with only a slightly reduced majority.
After the crisis, Whitlam was so sad. He went Gough Whitlam. Oh, jeez, you guys. I'm sorry I stopped doing puns after Holt.
Michael Townley and former South Australian Premier Steele Hall. Despite holding on to power and eliminating his Democratic Labour Party rivals out of Canberra, Whitlam still found himself at odds with the
Steele Hall's an interesting figure, actually. He's the guy that ended the Liberal Country Party's dominance in
As a result, Whitlam had
South
no
Australia.
other choice but to call the first and to date only joint sitting of Parliament, as per described in the Constitution.
I don't think I mentioned the
This would involve
CIA.
both
I know someone in the
parliament
comment
sitting
section
as a
did,
single
but I didn't.
legislative body to resolve all withstanding bills. Despite having a minority in
Well,
the
Thomas
Senate,
Johnson, you
Whitlam
could have,
hoped for the
if
lower
you
house
wanted
of
to
Order
get me to
power.
put bad puns
Given
into the
party with
2019 script,
95
but you
seat
didn't, and you missed out, so it's your own
compared to the
fault.
number two, held by all other parties. As a
My
result,
aunt from the
Whitlam was
Justice Side told me that
successful
these
after all
unrest in
sorts of
Melbourne
bills,
streets over
which
the
saw the
Whitlam government
creation of
forced the
many
place.
banks.
Yeah, it's funny to think Melbourne was one of the most
Some
bluest
electoral
states
reforms, including
back
establishing
in
two
these
senators
days.
for
Like it was
both
a
the Northern
massive
and
liberal
Southern
voting state.
territories. It was also around this time that Sir Paul Husluck's term as Governor General came to an end. Whitlam had offered to extend his term, however, Husluck declined, citing his
Yeah,
wife
you
to
better
not
or.
stay in the House. As a result, Whitlam had to appoint a new Governor General to replace.
Oh, you don't
Husluck.
mention that
After his initial
the
trust in
Paul
government
Husluck
power,
left
Whitlam
because his
offered the
wife
position
didn't
to
like
one
living in
Sir
government
John
house.
Kerr, the current Chief Justice of New South Wales.
I'll tell you, I
Whitlam
didn't keep
not
them to
voted
state
very
elections.
well.
The videos
However,
just
Kerr
won't
was
set.
close
The
friends
videos
with
just
other
won't be
members of the
viewed.
British government,
That's the
and both
problem.
their wives
Like, these
studied
videos get
together
barely
at
enough
school.
views as they are.
Whitlam had hoped the
That's why.
former Chief
That's why
Justice
I
would be a
can't go
respected
through the
choice
effort
as
of doing
Governor
a
General. And,
state
with
elections and
former
expect to
Labour
get anywhere
leader,
near the same
man's
views.
party
That's just the
agenda.
problem.
However, what Whitlam did not know is that Kerr's political views
Keating was a
had
cabinet.
changed,
Keating was a
and
cabinet
what
minister
Whitlam would
suggested
soon
arresting
find
Kerr.
out, the two saw the
Mentioned.
role of Governor General quite differently. Despite successfully getting his bills
Jesus.
and governor picks through Parliament,
Hunt
Whitlam
for Red
found
October.
himself
Just
governing
replace Red
Australia
October
through
with
one of
John
its most
Kerr.
challenging periods since World War II. In 1973, the nation of Israel would find its existence under threat when it was attacked on two fronts by the Islamic nations.
The
of
Yom
Egypt
Kippur
and
War is
Syria.
actually an interesting
Western
fight,
nations such as the US were
conflict.
strong allies of Israel and would send massive amounts of military support. This greatly aggravated the
John Robert
oil-producing
Kerr
Arab
should have been
nations who
more
supported
careful.
Syria. In response, these nations would begin a monthly
Keep them coming, guys. Keep them coming. This is great.
triggering an energy
Oh no, I
crisis.
did the bad laugh
Almost
again. Oh,
overnight, the
damn it.
price of fuel would spike, along with it all other goods, as oil was used in production and transportation.
We got 57
In turn,
playbacks,
this would
which is
lead to the
good.
biggest recession
I
since
think.
the
I think
Great
that means 57
Depression.
people who are
And
watching
soon
at the
Whitlam's
moment,
government
outside,
found
plus the
inflation
9 who are
and
currently
rapidly.
live with
Despite
me.
this, Wilson would still push for a wage increase in the public sector, as well as increased spendings on education. This led to great unease within the Labour Party, which would result in Whitlam's deputy Lance Barnard being replaced by Jimmy Carnes. Despite the economic troubles, Whitlam would still proceed with giving Papua New Guinea its independence, as well as crafting the Aboriginal Lands Right Act. which ought to give a large amount of the Northern Territory over
So
to
they're
the
talking about
Aboriginal
this at
people
church
there,
today.
as a protected
With
region
the,
from
my
outside mining and
minister
farming
decided to do a
operations.
sermon on
Due to
the
finances being hard to
famous
come by,
giving the
in
soil
order
back to the
fund more
Aboriginal
ambitious
people.
development projects, he would have to seek out a loan. The standard practice was to conduct the loan through the Loans Council, a group consisting of a member from each state, territory and federal governments, who oversee financial borrowing of all the governments. However, in 1974, the coalition
I love this song
dominated
as
the
well.
states and territories governments 5-3, giving them control over the Loans Council, making them very hostile to any borrowing by Labour, especially in a recession. To avoid the council,
You just see how hard Whitlam's situation was. He just like surrounded by people that hated him on all sides. So is that Friendly Geordie's friend's uncle? Is it?
Acting independent of the Loans Council, he was also acting independent at the Treasury as well. And the use of Arab sources was quite unreliable and risky.
Rex Connor, yeah. Should be a YouTube channel. It's like, hey guys, it's your buddy Rex Connor here.
Securing the loan through a US investment bank the next year. However, the original loan details would leak out, and despite the loan never actually being conducted, the Whitlam government would be attacked viciously over the shady dealings. And later, when it was found out that
What a shock.
Whitlam would be forced to sack him. All the loan had resulted in was portraying Labour as incompetent, and its polls would tank. With the polls increasingly showing the Labour government as unelectable, the new leader of the coalition would yet again try and force another early election. Since losing the 1974 election, the knives had been out for Billy Snedden. Despite Labour's woes, Snedden was unable to make headway against the charismatic Whitlam. This would eventually lead to his demise at the hands of the Conservative wing of the Liberal Party, led by one John Malcolm Fraser. Fraser was born in Melbourne in 1930 and had grown up in a very politically active family, with his father heavily being involved with the Liberals back when they were the United Australia Party, and his grandfather being one of the very first members of the Australian Senate as a member for the Protectionist Party. After studying overseas, Fraser would return to Australia and would win the seat of Wannon off Labour, who have never held the seat since. During the 60s, Fraser would move up the ranks of the party and would become Minister for the Army, in which Fraser would oversee the controversial Vietnam conscription program before being moved to Minister for Education and Science when Gorton took over.
Oh dear, this most of the stream's running a bit later than I thought. I was meant to be going somewhere soon, so I'm going to have to run away as soon as the next video is over, guys. So I won't be able to stay too long.
Assisting Gorton's downfall, a move which Gorton never forgave Fraser for, right up until his death in 2002.
Grammer is going to play an
After the
Australian
coalition's
Prime
downfall in
Minister, Malcolm
1972,
Fraser.
Fraser would have to fight to keep a position in the shadow
What, is this like some TV
cabinet,
series or
but
something?
eventually ended up with the Minister of Industry Relations.
What would you
However,
do big
after
state
Sydney's
elections?
defeat in
Would you do big state
1974,
elections like the
he would make
Queensland?
his move to take over
Possibly.
the
I've also
Liberal
thought about
Party,
potentially
defending
doing
initially in 1974, but
like
succeeding
multiple
the next
elections,
year.
like talking about
Shortly
eras,
before Fraser's
which is a
rose to become
possibility.
leader, Tasmanian Independent Senator Michael Townley would join the Liberal Party, giving them 30 out of
Did you
the
know
total
Keating
60
used to
seats
go
in the
to
Senate,
Jack Lang's
giving them
house
effective
and
control
brain
of the
pick him?
chamber. This control was
Yeah,
still
well, I
firmly
mentioned that a
held
bit
when
in
Queensland
the
Labor Senator Bertie Milner
1963
died in
election.
June. Due to his death, it fell upon the Premier of that
What's
state
it
to
called?
replace him.
1990 Victoria
However,
election.
instead of going with Labour's pick
Because I'm related to the
of
governor
Mal
at the
Colston,
time who decided
Queensland
to.
Premier Joe Peterson
It'd be interesting.
instead
Like,
sent Albert
I
Field,
could do like
Labor member
multiple
who was a
ones.
massive critic
I
of
just
Whitlam.
know that like
This
they're just not going to be as
outrageous move would
popular.
immediately
That's the
be challenged
problem.
in court by the Labor
Especially
Party.
because the
However,
best
in
one
the
to be able to
meantime,
cover is my own
Labor would
state,
be
South
down a member in
Australia.
the Senate. Seizing on his Senate majority and Labor's unpopularity, Fraser would use the Senate to create a political deadlock in Canberra, hoping yet again to force Whitlam into another double dissolution election. However, with polls increasingly showing a landslide defeat for the Labour Party, Whitlam would not call
Was
an
there
election,
something
and
about
thus
Fraser
the
losing his
1975
trousers at some
Australian
point? I don't know.
constitutional crisis had begun, with the government unable to pass any bills. This would put a countdown in Canberra, as without a supply bill, the government would run out of money and go bankrupt. One of the two men had to yield, but who would it be? Come back next time for part 2 of the election of 1975. Every nation has their controversial elections. The US has the 2016
what I'm asking you guys,
the UK has the Brexit
oh, this was wait.
and Brazil has the election of the 2014 FIFA semi-final.
I thought this was funny.
They might have number 7 here now. They have got 7.
Never mention 7-1 to a Brazilian.
However, for Australia, it's hard to think any election could be more controversial.
But I was to say that
with the government and opposition,
seeing how long this this live stream's going, I might have to split the season 3 one into 2 parts. I was going to get your opinion on that, but actually I'll talk to you guys. I might talk to you guys now. Sorry if you guys were wanting to watch the video, but basically, I don't think I'm going to be able to get the 2019 election video out this next week. I'm going to have to. I just want to give me 2 weeks just so I can comfortably finish it. So
I'm thinking, seeing how long this is going, I'm going to split season 3 into 2 parts. And so I'll do half the videos next week, and then I'll do the other half the week after that, and then I'll put the 2019 election at the end of that half. So yeah, because I've realised this is going on a little later than I thought.
Initially, Kerr attempted to get both Fraser and
So unfortunately, yeah, I haven't quite recorded the 2019 election yet.
And in return, Whitlam would call for a Senate election no earlier than May the next year.
Maybe you can make videos going into more detail about famous events in Australian politics. Yeah, I also thought about potentially doing ones on Prime Ministers. It's also other videos are being done on some of those stuff as well. Yeah, so I'm going to hold off on 2019 because I've got another video I'm working on right now on my other channel, which I want to get done first. Also, next week's E3 week, so we're in E3 at the moment, so Gaming Me's watching all the press conferences, so they're still also definitely taking time out that I could be working on a video. Yeah, Robert Menzies gets one last mention before the videos are done. Surely you'll need to grow your viewership if you're the only Australian political... I'm not the only Australian political channel.
However, Fraser offered not to do this if Whitlam...
I think Ozpol Explains. Look at Ozpol Explains. He does similar stuff to me.
Refused. However, he did agree to meet with the opposition.
Well, saying it was going too long. Yeah, I agree. Season 3. Yeah, I'll do season 3 in 2 parts. This is definitely going on a bit too long. I do apologise.
It was the last day to call an election before Christmas.
So what that would be what? There's 16 videos. So I'll do 8 videos, which is so I'll do 8 videos. Which will be what, 77, 83,
deadlock could not be resolved, and an election would be required involving both houses.
93, 6. So to 96, I'll go to 96 then, and that means 98, 1, 4, 7, 10, 13, 16, 18, yeah. So yeah, I'll do it to 1996 next week. Who was the guy talking about Goodfellas? Not Goodfellas. True Believers. I'm curious if the person who's watched True Believers has seen the dismissal as well.
Kerr would later bring the time up to 12:45 p.m.
You know what I'd love to see? I'd love to see a series called like Canberra that's just the entire history of Australian politics portrayed by actors. So like, you know, have a guy be Barton, have the first episode be from like Barton's appointment to, I don't know, Barton's dismissal, and then so each election sort of covers a different era of political history. A bit like the Crown, but the Australian government as opposed to the monarch.
Kerr would ignore this and instead hand Whitlam his own letter proclaiming the dismissal of Whitlam.
I'm impressed you can watch them because I find these shows very slow. Australia had a tendency in these days of making really slow, draggy TV series, which is an issue I always had. I think they've got better now.
Fraser was then invited into Kerr's office, and upon swearing to...
I also like music a lot of the time, which makes the scenes just feel very empty. Like, I probably sound more right now because I have got no music in the background.
Canberra had heard the news that the Prime Minister had been sacked. Around 5 p.m, Kerr's secretary David Smith would read
Still alive?
the confirmation of Whitlam's dismissal on the steps of Parliament
He actually does
House,
tours of old
with
Parliament
furious
House these days, that
crowds
guy
of
apparently.
supporters, ending with the traditional words of God Save the Queen, which prompted Whitlam, standing close by, to respond with what is possibly the most famous speeches in Australian political history.
We say, God save the Queen. Because nothing will save the Governor General. Yeah, Aussie soap operas feel about a lot. Yeah, I'd agree with that. I actually wrote a show called Canberra, which when I was in school. So what was that one about then, Red Knight?
And with that, the election was set for the 13th of December 1975, and the campaign would be the most aggressive in Australian history. Labor would use the dismissal to generate outrage at Kerr and Fraser, and quickly Whitlam began drawing huge crowds at his rallies, with people handing money to Whitlam to pay for his campaign. Meanwhile, the now Prime Minister Malcolm Fraser would run his campaign on the message of turn on the lights, portraying 3 years of Labor rule with 3 years of darkness.
So we're about 2 minutes from getting... This is about 2 hours to stream.
The largest landslide in Australian history, picking up 30 seats.
And by the way, if you were curious, that is actually a bigger landslide percentage-wise than Labor's win in 43. If you were curious, that is actually the biggest percentage-wise and seat-wise.
After 50 years of partnership, the two parties would continue the coalition.
While Whitlam's campaign had initially gained a large amount of momentum from the sacking, by election day the nation's focus was
Actually, to be honest, I don't even know what a cur was, John Mezzo. What that word means.
only at 36 seats. Labour would lose nearly all their young upcoming members, holding only their safest seats.
There's some of these like insult words from like I think any people here who's like under 30, you would agree with me. There's just a bunch of like insult words that they used to use like in the 70s and 80s, and they like get super offended if you use them even though you had no idea they were insult words. I know the infamous one was coon. Like, you remember how Coon Cheese had to change their name because their name was offensive, and like people of my generation were like, coon was an offensive word.
Keep his job as Governor General. However, he would not last long. Facing unrelenting attacks from the Labour Party and their supporters.
Yeah, here's the drunken speech someone was talking about.
Hound him wherever he went. Kerr would resign in December of 1977. He would flee to the United Kingdom and would live out the rest of his
Oh good, I got
life.
Northern Ireland properly drawn this time.
He eventually passed away in 1991 at the age of 76. However, his death was kept secret to avoid the shame of being denied a state funeral by the then Hawke Labour government. To some, the biggest loser of the 1975 constitutional crisis and subsequent election was not Whitlam and the Labour Party, but Kerr himself, whose distinguished career had been crushed and would live out the rest of his life in shame and exile. Meanwhile, as for Whitlam and Fraser, they would have one more go against each other, as I come back next time for the election of 1977.
Alright, that's the end of the playlist. I'm sorry, I've been a rant. So, I'll see you guys next Sunday at the same time. That's 8 p.m. So I'll be doing the first half of season 3 because this is gonna. In fact, the problem is the first half is full of all the shorter videos. So the second half, that's gonna be a long stream, but it'll be a long stream with a 2019 election at the end. I think it will be worth it. In the meantime, I'm gonna have to go pick up someone, so I've got to cancel this stream pretty much straight away. So sorry I won't be able to